And welcome to the City of Waterloo Special Council meeting of Monday, June 18th, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. I have disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof from council members, if applicable. Seeing none. First up is under staff reports, item 2A, Herbsville South Environmental Study, prepared by Robin McMullen. I don't think there's any presentation, but Robin's here for Q&A. Should we see any? Councillor Burke.
This is pretty good reading. It's a lot, although the pictures of the animals are nice. This is 22 years in the making, and interesting, one of the last remaining pieces of developable land in that area. Are we confident at this point that everything's been done to protect the woodland, the waterways, and the wildlife in that area, at least as far as we can go?
The short answer to that question is yes. The longer answer is the feature, so whether the woodlands, the wetlands, the watercourses, the significant wildlife habitat, they will be protected based on today's standards and best practices. And in addition to that, through implementing the buffers that are recommended in the study, we'll actually be creating additional habitat areas. So right now, there's basically farm fields up until feature edges, and we'll be able to use that land that will benefit, or in a way that will benefit wildlife much more than what currently exists.
So a question, because I said this is 22 years in the making from when kind of the process began. And this is purely throwing out a question. Does this study look different than it would have 22 years ago? Have we made some kind of progress along there?
Again, short answer is yes. With each year and with each decade, policies get tightened. We learn more from science. We go about things differently. We learn about best practices. So the existing 1996 subwatershed study, while it still provides very relevant and useful background information, this certainly adds to that and supplements it and allows us to plan more responsibly moving forward.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, I know Councillor Burke is very keen on this, judging by his questioning. Seconder, Councillor Whaley. Further discussion? All those in favor? All of us, thank you, Robin. B, Herbsville South Block Plan, confirmation of terms of reference, prepared by Rick Martins, who's here today, tonight. No presentation, questions for Rick? Seeing none? Perhaps a keen councillor would care to move it? Keen councillor moves it. Councillor Burke, Councillor Henry. No further discussion. All those in favor? Thank you. That's all of us. Thanks, Rick. Formal public meeting. Here we go. Yeah, well, yeah, don't count your chickens. This is a formal public meeting to consider Official Plan Amendment 23 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1707, 1106804 Ontario Inc., 80 King Street South and 86 Regina Street South. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on May 31st, 2018 and mailed or emailed on May 31st, 2018 to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on Monday, June 12th, 2017, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. The planner, Wendy Fisher, will now give a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Wendy.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and ladies and gentlemen. The application before us tonight for the formal public meeting includes Official Plan Amendment 23 and Zone Change Application Z1707, which applies to 80 King Street South and 87 Regina Street South. The subject lands consist of two municipal properties that can be seen here. 80 King Street is located on the left and 87 Regina is on the right, which are bound by King Street South, Willis Way, and Regina Street South, as well as municipal and commercial uses further to the south. Hughes Lane also separates the two parcels. 80 King Street is approximately 0.165 hectares, and currently contains a multi-tenant building that is used for financial services, restaurants, and retail stores. And 87 Regina is about 0.18 hectares in size and is currently used as a surface parking lot with about 54 spaces designated for the commercial uses at 80 King Street. The lands these lands are located within the Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center, which is the city's primary node. And 80 King is adjacent to the Ion, which is running northbound on King Street with two stops in the area. Waterloo Public Square, which is about 60 meters from the site, and Willis Way, which is about 200 meters from the site. There are trails to the north, which include Laurel Trail, as well as the Spur Line Trail. And Laurel Creek is north of the subject lands as well and runs under the buildings and structures and resurfaces on the northeast corner of the subject lands. The official plan, the lands are currently designated as Uptown Commercial Core that provides for a maximum density of 750 bedrooms. The maximum heights permitted under the official plan includes 16 meters along 80 King Street and then 81 meters for 87 Regina. The commercial core provides a broad range of uses and the lands are also designated as special policy area. They're contained within the Laurel Creek area. The OP also provides for road widenings along Willis Way and Hughes Lane. The lands are zoned Commercial 825, which provides for a broad range of uses, including commercial, residential above the main floor. Site-specific bylaw was passed in 2005, which limited the height of 80 King Street to 14 meters with a 6-meter minimum. And the second site-specific bylaw was passed in 1991, which exempted both parcels from any parking requirements. The applicant is proposing to amend the official plan by adding a specific provision area to permit the lands to be planned comprehensively for the purposes of sharing density and parking, and to provide for a maximum density of 750 bedrooms per hectare for the combined lands, as well as to apply holding provisions for safe access route, building code compliance, emergency response and fire plan, as well as stationary noise study, which I will elaborate on these in a few moments. The applicant is also proposing to amend the zoning bylaw to rezone the lands from Commercial 825 to Holding Commercial 825. And again, the holding provisions would apply to record of site condition, the safe access route, as I mentioned before, the building code compliance, emergency response fire plan, and the stationary noise study. As well, there's a number of site-specific provisions that are being requested. Maximum density of the combined lands, again, to 750 bedrooms per hectare. Increase the height of 80 King Street from 14 meters to 16. Increase the height along 87 Regina from 75 meters to 81 meters. Measure the residential density in bedrooms per hectare. Reduce the front, rear, and public lane setbacks for 80 King Street. Reduce the front and lane setbacks for 87 Regina. Establish parking regulations and allow 2 bridge connections from 80 King Street to 87 Regina and from 87 to 99 Regina, which is the region's health and emergency services building. There are 2 components to the proposed development. The first is to add 2 stories, which is about just over 3,100 square meters of office space to 80 King Street. And the second is to construct a 26-story, 81-meter mixed-use building on 87 Regina. The mixed-use building will consist of a 7-story podium and a 19-story tower containing 216 units or 245 bedrooms, 277 square meters of commercial space that will be located at the corner of Regina Street and Willis Way, 184 parking spaces, and 107 bicycle parking spaces. In terms of the height and density, the proposed height of the development aligns with the height provisions noted on Schedule B1 of the official plan. The building at 80 King Street would be a maximum of 16 meters, which is consistent with the Main Street designation. And the proposed development at 87 Regina would be a maximum of 81 meters, which is consistent with the high density designation. The official plan also provides for consideration of sharing density where there is a property that has split designations. Policy 1.4 states that permitted residential densities may be transferred across a land use designation boundary provided that the property is developed under a single parcel of land and it's under the same ownership, and that all of the provisions of the individual designation and implementing zoning are met. The site is different in this regard because there are two properties that are physically separated by a public laneway, that being Hughes Lane, rather than one single parcel. Staff had reviewed this and are of the opinion that the development does meet the intent of the official plan in this regard because the lands are held under the same ownership. They do function together and have for some time, with the parking at 87 Regina providing for the tenants of 80 King. They will continue to serve that function in a similar manner with the shared parking between the two parcels, and they will be physically connected by an elevated pedestrian bridge. However, because the policy framework within the official plan specifically speaks to a shared parcel with that being one parcel, staff determined that an official plan amendment was required, again, to allow for the sharing of density between the two parcels. The lands are also located within the Laurel or Clair Creek Special Policy Area, and as such, safe access as determined by the Grand River Conservation Authority or the GRCA must be provided at the regulatory flood elevation. In this case, the safe access must be provided at 324.3 meters or just 0.8 meters below the regulatory flood elevation. In meeting this requirement, the GRCA has requires the applicant to provide one being a safe access route and the other being an emergency plan that would provide for evacuation measures and would address how the residents and occupants would vacate the building and what those protocols would look like. So MTE consultants on behalf of the owner has determined that the nearest point of safe access would be achieved along William Street, immediately west of Hughes Lane in the vicinity of Marble's restaurant. A safe access route was prepared and submitted for review. And in this access that's proposed, the residents of 87 Regina Street would evacuate the building through an elevated pedestrian bridge that takes them into the Regions building at 99 Regina. They would make their way through interior corridors within that building towards the south end of the property. And at that point, a new stairwell would have to be constructed within the landscaped area between Hughes Lane and the Regions parking garage entrance that's facing onto William Street. At that ground level, the residents would then cross a 1.2 meter wide raised pedestrian walkway across Hughes Lane, and the walkway would continue on to William Street. As part of the access route, Hughes Lane would need to be regraded, and the applicant has demonstrated that turning movements can be maintained with this regrading. However, there may be aspects such as possible tripping hazards that would need to be addressed. Staff are suggesting in this case that a holding provision be applied in the implementing bylaw to address the safe access in greater detail at a detailed design stage. While the applicant has entered into agreement with the region of Waterloo to provide for the construction and maintenance of this particular safe access, there still remains to be a number of outstanding issues. A A substantive issue was identified by the city's Building Standards Division, where 2 exits are required at all times, including during a flood event, in accordance again with the building code, whereas in this case the applicant has only provided us with 1. And this is irrespective of the type of land use being proposed. The applicant needs to identify and secure safe access route in order to provide that construction and to the satisfaction of the GRCA as well as the city's Building Standards Division. There are also a number of technical issues that have been identified in our review, such as the placement of water connections for firefighting, the Siamese connections. Typically where they're placed on the building would be, in this case, under the flood line, so they'd have to reconsideration for that. The location and availability of the building's emergency power supply has to be thought through. Operational designs in terms of the elevators, they'd have to stop at those elevated pedestrian bridges, maintenance of the safe access, and so on. The third item is that there's an official plan policy that requires development approvals granting in hazardous lands, which these are, that are regulated by the GRCA, needs written permission from the GRCA, and the applicant has not yet secured that from the GRCA. In this case, the GRCA has indicated that they would be providing clearance provided that the applicant provides documentation which demonstrates that safe access can be achieved and secured for the maintenance and be maintained for the life of the development, and that details to ensure that the satisfactory emergency response plan is in place. Staff are recommending a holding provision in the implementing zoning bylaw, as mentioned before, again, to provide that detailed safe access route and emergency plan to the satisfaction of the GRCA, the city, and the region. And this means that development is not permitted on the lands until such time as that safe access is secured, again, to our satisfaction. Staff note that planning for that safe access route can be more easily defined at the detailed design stage. We also recognize that the lands are currently zoned for multiple residential 25, so it means that the applicant could proceed with moving through to the next stage, which would be site plan, and this allows us to address this issue a little earlier on right now. And then the holding provision, as currently proposed, would also act as a notification should these of this safe access issue should these lands ever be sold. There are several other site considerations that we have been reviewing as part of this application. Waterloo North Hydro has indicated that the hydro poles and lines are located on Regina Street about 5 meters off the property line, and that additional clearance will be required in order to provide for necessary skyjacks and any other equipment required for construction. The applicant will be providing road widenings along Willis Way and Hughes Lane, but 87 Regina Street does have a 0 meter front yard setback requirement, and that's permitted under the C8 zone. The applicant is requesting a 1.9 meter vertical encroachment for the podium in the stories above the first story along Willis Way. The building has been designed so that it would recess on the first floor, and then the floors 2 to 6 would come out over Willis Way by about 1.9 meters. Staff note that there are a number of outstanding matters that could be affected at detailed design, such as the safe access, the building code compliance piece, as well as the hydro lines. So we are recommending at this stage that the encroachments be evaluated at a later stage. In terms of the setbacks, the applicant has requested a 0 meter setback for King Street, and that's simply to recognize the existing building. There are also a number of setbacks that have been requested for 87 Regina Street. It includes a decrease to the minimum public lane setback from 2.5 to 1.1 on the first story and 0.5 on the stories above, and then a 0 setback for the bridge connection between 87 Regina and 99 Regina. And staff support these setbacks. And while a step back is not regulated currently under the C8 zone, it is a basis for which the current design it's been included in the current design. So we are recommending that the regulations be included, again, based on the prominent location of this site, and the hope that through these step backs, it'll create a safer and a comfortable pedestrian environment. In terms of parking, while there is the exemption that I spoke of in 1991, where there is no parking requirements on these properties, the applicant is choosing to impose parking rates for various uses, and a total of 184 parking spaces would be provided in addition to 107 bicycle parking spaces. In terms of a record of site condition, one is required for 87 Regina Street, and given the fact that there is contamination in the area and that 80 King Street does provide for some sensitive uses, again, we are recommending a holding provision be placed in the implementing zoning, requiring a record of site condition prior to issuance of a building permit for any sensitive uses. In terms of noise, the applicant did submit an environmental noise study which did assess the stationary noise as well as road noise. To address the expected road noise, there are requirements for noise warning clauses as well as provisions for air conditioning. Because these items can't be secured based on the Planning Act and the applications that are before us, we will have to move or look towards future applications to try and secure them. They also assessed for on-site mechanical equipment, but again, between the new build on 80 King as well as 87 Regina, their mechanical equipment is not quite known, so we are looking to require a detailed noise study to be provided prior to issuance of a building permit. Off-site stationary noise sources have also been identified as an issue with an exceedance by about 10 dBA, and those localized sources will need to be reduced with on-site mitigation. So overall, in terms of the noise, we're recommending a holding provision in order to ensure that the off-site noise sources are addressed, as well as getting that detailed noise study prior to issuance of a building permit. And lastly, the wind and shadow impacts. A wind assessment was completed for the surrounding pedestrian environments and outdoor amenity areas, and the study found that the wind criteria was met in all of those locations. And in terms of shadow impacts, a shadow study was undertaken by MHBC, and it demonstrated that the height and location of the building at 87 Regina Street will not generate unacceptable amounts of shadow over the adjacent lands. There were a number of modifications that have been made to the design of the building based on comments that were received at the informal public meeting. The north and south facades have been redesigned and now include balconies, and there is a significant amount of glazing and horizontal banding that separates the buildings into the new sections. And the north and south facades remain very distinct in design from the east and west. And the east and west facades remain unchanged. The parking structure will also incorporate different building materials such as metal louvers, as shown here, with internal lighting designed to illuminate the twisted metal and create a unique design. After reviewing the application, staff are recommending that the official plan be amended to add the specific provision area in order to allow for the site to be planned comprehensively for the purposes of sharing density and parking, and that density not exceed 750 bedrooms per hectare for the combined lands. As well, a policy framework to be created to allow for the application of the holding of provisions, which would include that safe access route, the building code compliance analysis, the emergency response and fire plan, and the stationary noise study requirements. In terms of the zoning bylaw, we are supportive of the rezoning to commercial, holding commercial 825, and again, the holding provision would apply to record of site conditions, safe access route and emergency plan, the emergency fire plan, stationary noise requirements, as well as building code review. a maximum density of 750 bedrooms per hectare, again over the combined lands. The increase of King Street from 14 to 16 meters, and the increase in height of Regina Street from 75 to 81 meters. Measuring the density in terms of bedrooms per hectare. Reducing that front, rear, and public laneways, as shown here again, 80 King Street's recognizing for the existing building. Reducing the front and public laneways for 87 Regina Street. Establishing the parking rates for 87 Regina Street, and allowing the two bridge connections both from between 80 King and 87 Regina, as well as 87 Regina and 99 Regina. Staff are also supporting the parking regulations of 1.5 spaces per 100 square meters of commercial. That's to be provided at sorry, that says 80 King, it should say 87 Regina. And then the parking regulations at 87 Regina being 0.55 spaces per residential and 0 spaces for the commercial. As well, a bicycle parking of 0.5 spaces per bedroom. So in summary, with the implementation of the holding provisions to manage the public safety aspects for the floodplain, development within the floodplains, site contamination as well as noise, as well as supporting the general intensification principles within the city's official plan, staff are of the opinion that this application does represent good planning. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, lots to know there, eh, Wendy? Good job. First up is Councillor Whaley, Councillor Durrell.
Well, Wendy, that's a very complicated file that you've been working on. We're so lucky that we have someone of your skill and experience who got the file to go through so many issues. It's the first time I've ever seen, a building that had an evacuation plan of such sophistication. I guess it's a sign of the times. With climate change. I have a couple questions. The first one relates to the shadow study. You said there was no real issues there, but I wonder, because it's next to the town square, if there are going to be any shadows that impact the town square at any time of the day.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, they did assess the localized public areas, and they were deemed to meet the city's principles of either being 50% in the shade or not in shade, or having 50% of sun for 2 intervals, which it represents 4 hours.
I understand the technical answer, but I think the information we want to hear is the town square going to be in the shade a lot of the time because of this building?
To me, I don't think there is, with tall buildings, there will be some shade expected throughout the proximity of the site. There will be some shade cast in the Waterloo Town Square, but there is an acceptable level based on the principles that we follow in terms of our urban design guidelines.
With respect to the hydro lines, they're pretty darn close to the building, and you're recommending some solutions as part of the complicated processes you're going through. I know on Caroline Street in the recent past in the build, we opted for burying the hydro lines. Was that given any consideration in this case?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I think that is an option that is certainly something that's worth pursuing and having further discussions with the developer. At this stage, there's not been any formal commitments in that regard, but I think that there is an issue identified, and the developer will have to work through some of those solutions, that being one possible solution. So
this question will be answered at the site plan stage?
It will continue through this development as it proceeds, yes.
My last question relates to the parking. I thought that I saw at the informal public meeting the fact that there was only 4 stories of parking, but now I see that there are 6 stories of parking. Is that because there's any intention to provide some public parking as part of the program here, or is this 6 stories just for the needs of the 2 buildings?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, the parking that has been provided in this building is intended for the parking of the residents as well as the business owners. There's no formal public parking provided.
Will there be any visitor parking for that big building?
Yes, there is a certain percentage that is being provided for the visitors.
Thank you, Wendy.
Let me check that.
It's
Sorry,
just that-
I take that back. I'm not seeing any at this point. It's strictly
So there
for
is no
residential
visitor
commercial.
parking and very little parking anywhere around on the streets, right?
That's correct, but again, they're under a different regime based on that 1991 bylaw where no parking is required. So this site could potentially be developing without any parking. So the fact that we have 184 spots being brought forward as part of this development is a plus in terms of the overall area.
We'll wonder how the developer will answer these questions. Thank you, Wendy.
Next up, Councillor Durrell.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. And I will say the biggest parkade in Uptown is across the street. So there is that, the Uptown Parkade, yeah. Okay, so this is obviously a super tricky site because I've never seen this much talk about it. And I think it's worth talking a little bit more about it. What makes this site so tricky? You talked about the floodplain. So this is not just a little bit of rain like we got today. Why is this site so tricky?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Again, a good portion of Uptown Waterloo is within the floodplain, and it has limited ability to put residential units within a floodplain, and that is a provision or a requirement under the Grand River Conservation Authority. Because of that limitation, it means that each and every site that we look to develop, and we're really promoting the mixed use, and we want to see people living in our core. But the problem is that, again, because of the floodplain that covers a good portion of the Uptown, they all need to be provided with safe access. And that's the tricky part, is that, again, their safe access in this particular instance is quite a piece away from the building. And so other more creative measures had to be applied to this property to provide that safe access.
For me, one of the most important elements of this proposal is the pedestrian experience. And you just flashed up a picture on your that I hadn't seen before, and I'm just wondering, you kind of went through and you were saying east-west, and I'm not a farm girl, so could you just no. Okay, sorry, we passed it.
That one?
Keep going. I know where we are there.
I'm almost at the beginning.
Oh, sorry, you're going the wrong way.
It's that one or
keep going,
that
keep
one?
going, keep going.
The one with the pictures.
Yeah, keep going. There it is. Okay. Where am I here?
Well, these are just examples of different facades.
Oh, okay, so this isn't in Uptown.
So this is not, no.
Okay,
no.
okay, because the barriers were worrying me. Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about then, okay, I got it now. I see what you're saying. Excuse me. I'm curious about the pedestrian experience around it and what we've done to, need more coffee, what that experience will be for people who are walking around. That's a high traffic area.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, the applicants have provided an activated space at the corner of Regina and Willis Way. And again, the intention is that there are people who are able to be out on the street, if it's a cafe or if it's a business. The podium itself is meant to mirror again or reflect the Regions buildings and the buildings that surround it, again, not being too overpowering. So between that and the fact that, again, the wind studies and some of these other elements that have been identified to provide for that enjoyment would also have been addressed and provide for a better environment for any pedestrians in that area as well.
So it's hard to tell from the, what are they called? The site plans, conceptual site plan. Mm-hmm. But are there any barriers for people looking into the building or walking past it? If I'm walking down up Willis Way towards the public square, what is my experience as a pedestrian? Or is that a better question for the Okay,
I would agree.
got it. Okay, thank you very much.
Next up, Councilor Maven.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and through you to Wendy. Mr. Nevin and Mr. Rapp will remember when this plot on 87 Willis, our 87 Regina Street was going to be developed in 1994. So it's been sitting around for an awful long time. So it's really good news to see that something's going to happen here now and make use of that land. It sort of morphed into a controlled access parking lot over the years, but certainly wasn't the most productive use of the land. But on the 80 King Street, I got a question on the site-specific zoning at that time had a minimum height of 14 meters. Why was the 14 meters chosen?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I believe that the site-specific that came through, and there are probably other people in this room that could answer the history on that 14 meters, but I believe there was an intention on bringing the height to align with the height and density study that was completed in 2003, and I'm going to look at Mr. Rapp to help me out with the history on that one.
Certainly. In addition to Wendy's comments through to Councillor Maben, through the Nodes and Corridors Height and Density Policy Study along King Street, the main street, if you will, of uptown, there was a view held by the community and council today and staff to keep a certain volume of space open along King Street so that we didn't get into a corridor effect, that it still allowed for the opportunity of the introduction of more sun through the main uptown area. And there was a sense that keeping it to about 4 stories, whether it's 14, 16 meters, but the premise was 4 stories, to keep it limited to that all along King Street, to try and keep that openness, if you will, a feeling as opposed to a technical measure. That's really where it came from.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. And maybe it's a better question to ask of the developer, but what does that extra 2 meters give the project?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I do think that one is a question for the developer.
Okay, thank you.
I will have a question regarding the safe access route. That's only applicable because this is a residential tower. So if it was an office tower, it wouldn't require the safe access route, or would it as well?
To you, Mayor Jaworski. Yes, you're right. The safe access in terms of GRC is only required for residential.
Okay. Thank you. And I see no further questions, so thank you very much. I'll now ask any registered delegations to come forward, of which we have one. First up is Dan Curry. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. My name is Dan Curry with MHBC Planning, and we're representing the applicants who are Torgan Corporation, and they're here with me tonight. So Ornella and George, and also with me is Trevor Hawkins from our office. Staff as always did a very comprehensive presentation, so I won't cover the same detail that Wendy did. Even though you'll see on the slides there might be some repetition, I'll just maybe focus on the main points I want to communicate. And really, I think the first one, notwithstanding there are a number of zoning bylaw requirements that are written into the proposed site-specific zoning bylaw, and Wendy went through those comprehensively. Really, the purpose of the application is twofold. One, the majority of those amendments are to amend the zoning to comply or to conform with the existing official plan designation. The other is to treat the lands as one parcel for density and parking purposes, which Wendy described. And I'd add a third one, really. There were a number that are related to the existing building at 80 King Street, and that's simply to recognize its existing location. So the overall development proposal is to add on the 80 King Street side a 2-story addition to the existing building at 80 King Street. And that's part of the reason for the increase in height on the King Street portion from 14 meters to 16, is that 16-meter height limit allows for a 4-story commercial or office type building. Results in the doubling of office space. On the residential side, which would be on the 87 Regina Street portion, a total of 216 units. Primarily 1 and 2 bedroom units. There was a total of 245 bedrooms. There will be at-grade commercial, and this will be oriented to Willis Way and Regina. Of course, the King Street portion, the ground floor will remain much as it is. And I'll come back to that in a second. We have a couple of visuals to show that. So again, Wendy touched on this, but at the informal public meeting, it was about a year ago, one of the comments we got both from committee as well as from staff was the design, particularly of the north and south facades. So the north facade, is that showing? Yeah, would be this here. So one of the changes to the overall design of the plan is to redesign this facade and the corresponding south facade that have now balconies, a greater degree of glass, and are much more less blank than maybe they appeared in the design that was presented at the public meeting. I guess the other point to mention too, that one of the main changes from our presentation at the public meeting a year ago was we were requesting the council not take the road widening on Willis Way. That's now off the table. The setbacks are such that the city would be able to take the widening at Willis Way. That will help in regard to the pedestrian environment, and I'll come back to that again as well. In terms of the policy considerations, again, Wendy, both in the staff report and then in her presentation, covered this in detail, but it hits the location of where this property is right in the heart of Uptown. Yes, there are some challenges and issues that we have to work through, particularly on some technical details. It's in the floodplain. There are several things that still need to be considered, but it is in the right place for a mix of uses, implements the height and density permissions and the goals and objectives of the city's official plan. It takes essentially what is a surface parking lot and transforms that into a higher and better use. So the safe access route, certainly this is something that has to be accommodated through the city's policy. The city identifies a special policy area for the Uptown, which, as noted there, it's intended to identify that there is risk. This is a floodplain, but also recognize the importance of being able to have development in the core. So we will have to address that. The access that's worked out with the region of Waterloo that Wendy described and we presented in the informal public meeting is a route through the adjacent regional building. There is an agreement. At the same time, the GRCA has identified some concerns with that option. There are other options, and we will continue to work through that. And the hold provision, site plan approval, all the other processes that we have to go through, we won't be able to pass through until that issue is resolved to the satisfaction of all the agencies. But ultimately, it's the holding provision that's being recommended by staff. We support, my clients support the application of the holding provision. And that's an appropriate tool to be applied by the city to ensure that safe access route, as well as the other things, the noise study, etc., are addressed. So this is a useful slide just to identify on the Willis. So this would be looking west along Willis Way. You can see the parking structure here, and then 80 King Street in the distance, and then ultimately it would be the continuation of Willis Way past King Street. But this is the type of design that's intended for the 87 King Street building, 87 Regina Street building, with residential at grade, fully animated entrances to the shops that would be on that first level, as well as, and it's hard to see the scale in a diagram like this, but this envisions that the road widening is taken and that widening really would be the enlargement of the sidewalk and the pedestrian area, and probably look much like the sidewalks that are on the portion of Willis Way west of King Street now. Very, very wide sidewalks. And same thing with Regina Street. So we know that staff are recommending approval. We encourage council to accept the staff recommendation and approve the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. It's consistent with provincial policy, consistent with regional policy and the city's official plan. The supports the investment in the LRT and the other things the city's doing to invest in the uptown and the community as a whole. And we think both the design of the building and the redevelopment of what's really an existing surface parking lot really will improve, particularly the Willis Way and Regina Street streetscape, but improve the overall function of this part of the city. And we're confident that there are still several issues to be addressed, but that through the subsequent processes, those can be addressed. And with that, I would conclude and happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Wonderful, and thank you very much for cropping your presentation. Just get to the salient points. That's wonderful. First up is Councillor Henry, Councillor Durrell, Councillor Whaley.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Dan, for coming. Since I have no comments at this point in the proceedings, I'll acknowledge that you've responded in your presentation to comments I made around north and south facades, as well as to setbacks along Willis Way. So one of the things I'll pick up just immediately on the rendering you're showing trees at grade along Willis Way. I recall from the staff report a note about what landscape treatments are possible along that stretch, given the encroachment of the overhang over some of that sidewalk. And I recall reading that trees were not possible there. I just want to confirm whether that's sort of a design flourish or whether from a landscape perspective that is something that is actually possible to plant along that zone.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. And maybe I'll go back to the previous slide. So ultimately, as we go through the site plan process, the detailed landscape, pedestrian environment, all that will get determined, as will whether or not there is any encroachment on the parking structure or not. So all of those decisions on all of those points will go hand in hand. And our expectation is that the necessary widening of Willis Way would be to the benefit of the pedestrian environment as opposed to the roadway. And if so, there is likely opportunity for trees along that way. The encroachment is, Trevor, 1.9 meters, so it's less than the road widening is taking. So overall, there's a net increase in what I'll call the pedestrian environment as you carry it up vertically. So there could well be opportunity for mature trees along that streetscape. I can't say absolutely that there will, because there's a number of decisions that we have to go through between then and now.
I will note with interest the enthusiasm on that point as site plan eventually mobilizes on the application. I'm curious as well. One of the things that I think Council asked questions about with interest and saw your architectural presentation a year ago at the informal, certainly very interesting. I mean, I'm aware that we're able to secure through some shrink wrapping of zoning urban design elements in terms of form and massing, but architecture is a different kind of story. What assurance should we have that the perhaps high level of architectural treatment you're providing around the parking garage and around the building as a whole is something that over time we could expect to see in this particular building should it be constructed?
Sure. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I can answer that as a planner, and I'd say there's maybe three, but certainly two things. One, the Torgan, they've owned this property since the early 1990s when the first 80 King Street property was built. And at that time, they designed the building with the thought, it's a two-story building, as you know, with the thought that it might be intensified over time. And actually, the structural engineering of that building allows for the 4 stories. And same thing with the parking lot. They plan on owning the building. They are not, recent developers to our community that are coming in, simply going to develop it and leave. So for them, they have a great deal of investment and care about what this building will look like and how it will function. They also recognize that this is a 25-story building that's in the heart of Uptown, and it's going to be very visible from everywhere. It's going to be a landmark. So there's a certain degree of pressure on them to ensure that it does come off to the best it can, so that it makes a very positive architectural contribution to the Uptown. They've engaged quadrangle architects who are well known for these types of developments. So they've got on their team the type of architects who have the skills and ability to pull this type of thing off. And then lastly, the third point I'd add is that we still have a lot of process to go through, and site plan approval is one of those. And yes, notwithstanding that there are certain things that can and can't be addressed through site plan, I'd say your staff are very vigilant on ensuring that they get good design where they can through that process. So I am confident, given who is developing it, where it's being developed, and the processes that are in place, is that what you'll see is very close to what's being described today.
Okay, and last question for you, and then I'll have a quick one for Mr. Rapp before I turn it back over. On the safe access question, and this isn't part of the reason why I raised the architectural aspiration of the project. I think you mentioned very quickly that you have confidence that these are issues that can be resolved. I mean, to date, they haven't been resolved or specifically identified that I've really seen. But you're confident this is the issues around safe access are possible to resolve and retain some element of economic viability for the proponent here, that they could be realized without having to, shave and reduce to be able to still make this happen. It is a significant issue.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, certainly it is. I think where we're at right now is that we are confident that there are options that can address the safe access issue. There are some technical, I'll call them details, but I don't want to minimize them, that have to be resolved. And that will require further discussion and agreement with the city, the region potentially, and sign off an agreement with the GRCA. We wouldn't be, I think, at this point, if my clients and the consultant team that they had thought there wasn't any ability to get safe access for a residential building. We would have. We've been working on this for a long time, since 2011, and a lot of that first part of the time was invested in those negotiations with the region for the safe access through their building. If we didn't think we could do it, we would have stopped a while ago.
Fair enough. So question for Mr. Rapp, to follow on the mayor's question to Wendy about GRCA requirements around safe access being restricted to residential. Is there other information we should know on that?
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Henry. Wendy's correct in stating that the GRCA and their regulations and through their board, they do look for safe access for residential uses. However, the Ontario Building Code states that there are 2 accesses required, permanent accesses, regardless of the use, whether it be commercial, employment, residential. So even if it were to be developed, not like this proposal, but as a commercial office building, the same issue would still be there ultimately. Different mandate and different approval authority, but the Ontario Building Code ultimately has the hammer and will require 2 accesses. Thank you.
I think that's helpful, because that's relatively new information to my ears relative to traditionally how we've heard about those issues around this table. Thanks.
Next up, Councillor Durrell, then Whaley, then Maven.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for your report. I guess I've already signaled what I'm looking for. Can you talk to me about what the pedestrian experience will be like around this building?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yeah, I think what I described a little bit, and then I can maybe go beyond that, is that the ground floor is intended to be both the entrance area and reception area, if you will, for the residential component, but it will also have street fronting retail. So in that regard, it will be an active streetscape.
Can I interrupt you for a quick second then?
Certainly.
One of the things that I've been hearing from the BIA, the Uptown BIA, which represents all of our businesses, is that many shops are struggling because they're too big, and so we're not seeing the smaller retailers being able to move in. Yep. And I'm seeing this as maybe one or two. Is this one shop alone, or is there a way to chop it up to allow, not chop it up, but create space so that perhaps this could be there could be more than one commercial space on the main floor?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yes, absolutely. The owners, Torgan, they don't have any preconceived notions as to what the retail should be or the size. There's, they're open to whether it's one shop, two shops, three shops, four shops, what have you, with the square footage that's available. And given that there's frontage on both Willis Way and Regina, it lends itself to that.
There's opportunity.
Correct.
Excellent. And then I was going through the traffic study again just to make sure I was fully understanding it all. Which tab is it open? One of the things that jumped out at me again was, so it's coming off of Regina Street, and I'm not sure if this is too specific, but we're not concerned about left-hand turns in and stopping the traffic queuing up back to William.
Okay, I see. So I'm
coming down William, I take a left onto Regina, and then I'm going to turn left into the proposed development. We're not concerned about queuing on that in that area.
Yes. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, if I understand the question, the access to the building is going to be right
for
there.
The vehicles, yeah.
Yeah. And so the issue is there any concern that as folks are waiting to turn left-hand into ultimately what will get them into the parkade, that there might be queuing that backs up onto William Street? No. So when we went through the process, neither the city nor the region required a traffic impact study, and that's because they were satisfied at the outset that the amount of traffic generated would not cause problems, did not require any remedial alterations to either Regina Street, Willis Way, or ultimately further upstream at any of the intersections.
Okay, sorry, I guess I'm reading the transportation impact brief. That's what I'm reading. Okay. Okay, and I know that this is very premature, but one of the questions I often get at, who's going to live there if this is in this proposal? It looks like it's a lot of one bedrooms and maybe a few two. So who's the target audience to live in this space?
I can answer that as the planner from what I know, and then George or Anel, if you have anything else to add. It is a combination of 1 and 2 bedrooms. They'd be oriented to what would be, I guess, the sort of typical condominium market for 1 and 2 bedrooms, young professionals, empty nesters, etc. I don't believe they've done any targeted marketing at this point. Or was there anything you wanted to add? Okay.
Okay. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Whaley, then Councillor Maven, please.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, Dan. First of all, none of the renderings showed the entrance to the building. You showed me some retail, but where's the entranceway and lobby to the building?
Oh, okay. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. there will actually be two entrances to the residential component of the building. One is being considered, and recognizing that as we go through the detailed building design and have to address those things such as fire access, etc., there might be some shifting around. But the concept plan that's been developed, or it's more than a concept plan, the site plan and the building design at this point that's been considered, is that one of the entrances would actually be at this corner of Willis Way and Hughes Lane. And it would open up at the corner. But part of that rationale is to provide some activity at that corner of the lane. These folks don't want to create, a deep, dark, cavernous laneway that might be contribute to an unsafe environment, or maybe the perception of an unsafe environment. As well as a lot of folks are going to be likely going in that direction, either to go up to commercial units and shops and restaurants on King Street, or to catch the LRT because they're going off to work. So there's going to be a natural desire to exit and enter and exit that building in that location. And the other one is for another entrance on the Regina Street side. So there'll be two entrances to the building where the sort of residential environment will be connected.
Is one going to be the main entrance and another like a back door? Is that the idea?
Not like through you, Mayor Jaworski, not in the sense of a back door where it might be what you consider a steel emergency exit door, but one will be the primary entrance and one will be what I call the secondary entrance, but still provide sort of a welcoming entrance on the street.
On Willis Way, we have the entranceway into the parking garage. On Regina Street, we have the entrance into Waterloo City Center. Where's your planned entrance for the cars?
This is the best picture, maybe. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. The entrance for the parking garage will be right here between the existing regional building and the new building. So the building, that side of the building is set back approximately 6 meters from the regional building to allow for a driveway. Folks will go in and then access a ramp and spiral up into the parking structure.
What are your thoughts on hydro line burial, Dan?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Jaworski. That's certainly one of the issues that we'll be looking at. That ultimately may be the solution to the issue that's been identified by Waterloo North Hydro. And we're talking about the existing above-ground hydro lines here. And so there are a couple of options. It may be that the building is able to be built without any change to hydro lines, or if not, then one of the options that the developers are considering is whether they have to be part of burying those hydro lines. So that's something we're certainly considering, and we'll work through the process with the city.
Can you shed any light on the shadowing issue on the town square?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can. So in the summertime, this building casts shadows that just reach to the town square. As Wendy noted, the town square is not in shadow for very long. Obviously, in the winter and the late fall and the spring, there's considerably longer shadows, and yes, those shadows reach to the square and even a little bit beyond. Having said that, the building footprint, this angle makes it look rather large. It's not actually that big a building in terms of the amount of shadow that it casts in its width. Obviously, at a 25-story building, casts a long shadow, but not in that width. So the shadow on the town square for those periods where it really doesn't last for very long. It's less than the 2 consecutive 2-hour periods in that time.
Well, you don't have any room for green space, so that must mean there's going to be amenity space in the building. Can you talk about that? I wondered about the podium on the 7th floor there. Is that going to be amenity space? Can you talk about amenities?
Yeah, through you to the through you, Chair Jaworski. The there is it's that visual is a little bit better. So between the floor between the residential tower and the parking structure is an entire floor that's amenity area, and so that will be for the use of the residents. At this point, I can't recall in the design, there's some outside amenity area and indoor and outdoor amenity area. So that will be the primary amenity area. There's also private amenity area with the balconies. All the units have a balcony component.
For me, thank you, Dan.
Over to Councillor Maven, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Dan, the question I asked Wendy was, what does that 2 extra meters from 14 to 16 meters give you?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. In summary, it gives us the 4th floor on that 80 King Street building. For commercial and office development, the ceiling to floor height is more in the order of 4 meters as opposed to residential. They're typically closer to 3. So the 16-meter height limit allows for 2 full commercial floors on top of the existing building.
Okay.
So that's primarily the difference.
Very logical. Thank you very much, Dan. One other comment, if I may. I want to compliment the Torgan Ownership Group. One, for their patience for all those years, and secondly, for having so much faith in Waterloo. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions in your presentation, Dan. You mentioned the region of Waterloo supports the development. What did you actually mean by that? I think you were talking just about the access bridge, correct?
I'd say on 2 parts. Yeah, certainly the region supports it in the sense that we've done a lot of work with them, and one of the options for safe access is through their building. But also as part of that, they support the concept of higher density in the urban growth center adjacent to, and it can support the LRT system that's up and coming.
And then in the staff report we had here, it mentioned that it was an 81-meter, 26-story building. In your presentation, you said 25-story. So yeah. Just wonder if there's been change there. Maybe that's a typo.
No, through you, oh, right. Okay. And maybe this, they've got a better graphic. And I think this was actually a question I was going to address in my presentation. I forgot. So it's 25 floors. But one of the differences, you can just see how this looks like it's 6 stories on the parking structure. I think that was a comment that was made earlier. And it's really only a 5-level parking structure. But because it's a corkscrew, what happens is there is a row of parking on this end. So it, even though it's 5 and quarter? A row of parking. So 5 1/4, it ends up resembling 6 stories here. So overall, it's just less, the height of the building is just less than the 81-meter maximum.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I just wondered if there was something in there that's been clarified. Thank you.
Okay.
Further questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else here present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Please come on up and you'll have 5 minutes. I just need your name and municipality, please. Welcome.
Kevin Reed, Waterloo. I just have, first of all, I really like that proposal. It's on a great corridor right next to the LRT. As soon as those condos go up for sale, let us all know, please. But 2 questions. If I was a condo owner there.
Just, you're presenting, not asking questions.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the foundation, Clair Creek runs right past it. if that one diagram there, like it's right by it. And I know there was some problems with Clair Creek across King Street. There was some issues there. Just making sure that the foundation there, it's a big building, it's a tall building. I'm not sure how deep they're going, what they're doing as far as what do you put Clair Creek in a tunnel there? Therefore, you don't get the drainage that you get, and then therefore you might get more flooding issues. So just I think that should be addressed at some point. Just make sure that the foundation is there, and the shadowing issues. With some of the projects that I've worked on in Toronto, one of the biggest commercial projects that's going in right down there, if you took, I'm not sure why the north side of the building in this diagram is taller, because if you reversed it, number one, people want the south side of the condos. They tend to sell better. But if you reverse it, when the sun moves, you get less shadowing. So I'm not sure who did your shadow study or whatever, but I would look at that again and just reverse it. And just have the south side, the tall side, because then you wouldn't get nearly as much shadowing as you do now.
Thank you. Points taken under advisement. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here present tonight who wishes to speak? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Durrell.
I'll move the motion.
Thank you. Second, okay. We'll
Do I have to read this now?
We'll come.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So for those of you in the audience, we have to read something specific for who are we reading this for? It's for the for developer, the government. Yeah. Zoning bylaw amendment Z 1707 80 King Street. 80 King Street South, 87 Regina Street. So council agrees with the planning staff, having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders and considered the professional opinions of the planning staff. Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 1707, 80 King Street South and 87 Regina Street South in accordance with Section 7 of IPPW 2018-006 for the reasons specified in Section 6 of the report.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Whaley. Any comments? Councillor Durrell.
One of the things I wanted to say was I understand how tricky this is, and I know I'd like to specifically say thank you to Wendy. I know that she has a lot of Uptown on her plate these days, so we're going to make you an official member of Uptown. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion with the developers and the planners on how to make this work. Since sitting in this position for the last 2 terms, we've never had this many questions sort of left unanswered as we move into approving it. But I think we had to come to a place in order for this building to start to move forward. And so I think we've come to a good agreement on what that looks like. And I thank our staff and the landowners for getting to this place where we can start to move this ahead. As far as I'm concerned, we're adding 300 people to live in Uptown, much needed office space, which I think is fantastic. It's going to increase the amount of people living and working in Uptown, which is always one of the main things that I'm interested in doing. I think this is a really difficult property to develop, and so I want to thank the developers for putting forward a building that's quite remarkable and beautiful, I think. And good luck as you move through the holding provisions.
Councillor Reith.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, this is beautiful, and it's going to make a huge difference in our Uptown. The thing that kind of concerns me that I think we need to think about for the future is the shadows. When I think about whatever shadow is going to be on the public square, what's happening down the road with development that comes, south, north, east, west, or the rest of that area around the public square? Is our public square going to be totally in shadows of tall buildings down the road? So that's my really only concern, but I'm really happy to support this beautiful development. Thank you.
Last call for comments. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? It's everybody. Thank you. Only one item left on our agenda, but don't let that fool you. This is a formal public meeting to consider Official Plan Amendment 16 and Zone Change Application Z1706, Ontario Dye Company, 93 to 119 Rogers Street. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you're signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on May 31st, 2018, and mailed or emailed on May 31st, 2018, and June 4th, 2018, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on Monday, May 8th, 2017, and to all persons who requested further notice.
The lucky planner, Wendy Fisher, will now give a brief overview of the application.
Good evening again, Mayor Jaworski and members of council and ladies and gentlemen. The application before us tonight for the formal public meeting is Official Plan Amendment number 16 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1706, which applies to 93 to 119 Rogers Street. The subject property is located southwest corner of Rogers Street and Moore Ave within the Mary Allen neighborhood. The lands are in close proximity to both uptown Waterloo and downtown Kitchener. A number of employers in the area, which are all within walking distance. Immediately south of the subject lands is a shared municipal boundary between Kitchener and Waterloo. And beyond that is the Mount Hope Cemetery, which is located both south and west of the property. There are two trails in the area. The Spurline Trail, which is with an access point to the north off of Moore Ave, and the Iron Horse Trail, which offers a pedestrian linkage to the west side of Uptown Waterloo and into Waterloo Park. And there are bus routes that run along King Street, Union Street and Weber Street, and the Ion, of course, which runs along King Street, with the closest stop at the Grand River Hospital, which is about 350 meters away. The lands consist of 8 municipal properties, which are shown here. Collectively, they're approximately 2 hectares in size. The property has about 158 meters of street frontage on Rogers Street and about 131 meters of street frontage on Moore. And as you can see by this aerial shot, this is the context of the neighborhood. The surrounding lands are predominantly contain single detached dwellings constructed in about the 1940s and 50s, with a few apartment buildings located in the vicinity on Lucan Ave, Union Street, Mary Street, and King Street. In terms of how the lands currently exist, of the total area, approximately 1.5 hectares is occupied by the Ontario Dye Company, and the remaining lands are used by single detached dwellings and 1 triplex fronting onto Rogers Street. There's an informal path that currently exists where the red arrow is at the bottom of the screen, and it leads into the cemetery and provides for access to King Street. The lands generally slope downward from the highest point, which is close to the northeast corner of the property, which is the dashed circle, to the lowest point, which is along the westerly property line closer to the southwest corner. The official plan currently designates these lands as low-density residential on Schedule A and low-density on Schedule B1, which permits a mixture of, again, low-density building forms, including singles and semis, duplexes and triplexes, townhouses, as well as terrace dwellings. The maximum permitted density is 150 bedrooms per hectare, and the maximum height is 10 meters. Moore Ave is also designated as a minor collector on Schedule B, and 119 Rogers Street is designated as an industrial transitional area, and the corresponding policies in their official plan recognize that this area may transition into something else beyond the industrial, more so to residential and higher densities. In terms of the existing zoning framework, 93 to 111 Roger Street is zoned General Residence 1, which provides for singles, duplexes, and semi-detached dwellings. The maximum permitted height is 10.5 meters, and there is a front yard setback requirement of 7.5 meters where no buildings or structures shall be permitted within that front yard. 119 Roger Street is zoned Industrial 1 for, of course, industrial purposes. The applicant is requesting to amend the official plan in order to redesignate the lands from low-density residential to mixed-use medium-density residential. And that, in considering that, there is up-designation will require the provision of community benefits. As well, to add site-specific provision area that would recognize a maximum density of 250 bedrooms per hectare. And on this property, that would equate to approximately 500 bedrooms. The maximum height for terrace dwellings or stacked townhouses to be 11 meters, and the maximum height for the apartment buildings to be 20 meters. The applicant is also requesting to amend the zoning by rezoning to holding multiple residence 6, and the holding symbol would require the applicant to complete a record of site condition prior to issuance of any building permit. The applicant is also proposing through this application to establish some site-specific provisions, which include the adding of terrace dwellings or stacked townhouses as a permitted use, establishing the density of 250 bedrooms per hectare, establishing a height, a maximum height of 11 meters within 35 meters of both Roger Street and Moore Ave, reducing the parking requirements from 1 space, which is required in the GR1 zone, to 0.95 spaces per unit, and establishing setback requirements from Roger Street about a range of 6 to 7.8 meters, and from Moore Ave 5 meters, westerly lot line 4 to 7.5 meters, and the southerly lot line 4 to 6 meters. As well, the request is to allow for the projections and encroachments within the front yard, which range from about 0.6 to 3 meters. Public consultation for these applications began over a year ago. The applicant held an open house in April of 2017, and the city followed suit with an informal public meeting in May. There were many concerns that were raised by the public through this consultation process, and so staff organized and hosted a neighborhood meeting in August. And at that meeting, there was consensus to form a smaller working group to just continue our discussion about the issues and concerns of the residents. That group, which consisted of about 7 residents, as well as the applicant, the applicant's consultant, and city staff, met on 3 separate occasions. As part of our process, numerous comments were provided, and the concept plans, which were provided and shown here in the upper right corner, were revised on several occasions. As part of those as part of those comments that we received, we were asked to consider height and density in terms of the proposed development, provisions of community benefits for the up designation, traffic and pedestrian safety, on-street parking, which had been already identified in the neighborhood as an issue, and concerns that an increase in population would only make that worse. The lack of parks in the neighborhood, the loss of trees, the concern or interest in greening, continuing at the greening, and servicing and infrastructure, the cleanup of the contamination of the brownfield sites. The City of Kitchener raised several concerns as well in terms of the impacts on the Mount Hope Cemetery, which is designated as a cultural heritage landscape, and whether there were any servicing implications on their side. Noise concerns with respect to more people brought to the property, but also from the mechanical equipment that would be associated with the development. Whether the units could be sold or rented, and the preference for units containing more bedrooms, the heritage value of the Ontario Dye Company building, as well as the houses on Roger Street, and possible impacts on property values, and a concern that there would be a disconnect between the concept plans and the final product constructed. 2 final concept plans were provided by the applicant in May. Both of those concept plans contain a mix of stacked townhouses as well as apartment buildings. The apartments, again, would provide that maximum height of 20 meters. They've been pulled back away from the streets, more to the westerly property line as well as along the southerly property line. The stacked towns now line both fully lined Roger Street and Moore Ave with a maximum height of 11 meters. The driveways were moved to align with the existing road network. And the applicant is providing 8 on-street parking spaces for a portion of the Roger Street frontage. But there were a few differences with the 2 concepts, namely based on the number of units proposed, the number of parking spaces, as well as the park locations. So as you can see here, Concept A contains 242 units, or approximately 421 bedrooms. That would consist of 168 apartment units and 74 townhouse units. There would be 234 parking spaces, and that's at surface as well as 1 level under each of the apartment buildings. And then it also proposes to contain a mid-block park fronting onto Roger Street, which is staff's preferred location. Concept B contains 244 units, consisting of, again, 168 apartment units, 76 stacked townhouse units, approximately 245 parking spaces, again, at surface and 1 level under each of the apartment buildings, and a park located at the corner of Roger Street and Moore Ave, which is the applicant's preferred location. So these are renderings that were prepared by the applicant of the proposed corner park. And while staff appreciate the design of incorporating the Ontario Dye facade or wall, there were a number of practical issues that were identified by city staff, namely the architectural integrity of the wall, which would be unknown to us if we were to assume the lands, the costs incurred by the city, again, for its long-term maintenance, as well as higher general maintenance costs associated with the elaborate planting and walkways, the clearing of walkways. Although difficult to read, this chart is really meant to symbolize the changes that occurred between the original submission back in a year ago in April and the revised submissions recently received. The applicant has removed the townhouses and commercial and office uses. The density has been reduced from 300 bedrooms per hectare and a maximum of 300 units down to 250 bedrooms per hectare. The height of the stacked townhouses has been reduced down by a meter, down to 11 meters. The parking rate was also reduced from 1.05 to 0.95, and then the accesses were also reduced from 3 down to 2. And while we reviewed these concepts, there were still 2 policy requirements that in our minds hadn't been sufficiently addressed. There is a policy within our official plan that states that when you're considering the up designation, among other things, community benefits are needed to be provided that will provide the community, that will help offset any impacts that might be realized by that increase in density. And the other is that the appropriate height and density transitioning at the interface where the existing neighborhood is meeting up with the proposed development. And these 2 policy considerations affect the parkland and the setbacks. In response to these outstanding matters, staff is proposing a 3rd concept, or Concept C. And it consists of a park that's mid-block or located on Roger Street, approximately 27 by 39 meters, as well as a 500 square meter amenity area at the corner of Roger Street and Moore Ave, again to include a portion of the ODC facade. The setbacks along Roger Street are larger than what's proposed by the applicant, again, and we've added an additional landscape buffer. And the projections and encroachments have been decreased by comparison to what has been offered by the applicant. In staff's mind, the benefits of that mid-block park is that it provides a safer access for younger children. You're away from that busier intersection. You've got an area that would provide for a large opportunity of programming. It creates an opportunity for the city to establish a north-south pedestrian connection through to the southwest corner. It also provides a physical separation between the existing dwellings on Rogers Street to the new stacked townhouses or block that's closest. And it effectively reduces the massing of those blocks of stacked townhouses as you move from west to east. You can see that you've got a block of 2, then a block of 4, then a block of 6. So again, it's providing that better transition. And the corner park, in staff's opinion, in combination with the on-street parking, does address that requirement for community benefits. The corner park, in our mind, is seen as promoting social interaction within the neighborhood, and it provides that additional space for the community, really for the passive recreational piece. It does retain that symbolic element of the ODC facade and would act so that, again, it's a reminder of the city's manufacturing history and a commemorative piece to the Levine family. And then it fosters that sense of place and acts as a gateway to the development. So the park proposal includes concept A and B, which was suggested by the applicant, and then concept C, which is staff's preference. Parkland dedication is calculated based on the number of units. So up in the top right corner is the approximate range of parkland that would be coming to the city. Again, that's based on the number of units proposed. So as you can see here, concept A, again, a 27 by 39 square meter park, providing for about 1,000, just over 1,000 square meters in total. Still wouldn't provide the city with its full requirement of that 5% parkland dedication. Similarly, concept B was proposing a publicly accessible a privately owned and publicly accessible park that's approximately 850 square meters in size. In this particular instance, the owner would continue to own the property and be responsible for maintaining the park. And in this case, the ODC facade and the plantings are also maintained by the owner. And the city would require an easement over that parcel. And concept C, again, has 2 components to it. The first would be the first one is the city-owned parcel, which is the mid-block one, 27 meters by 39 meters approximately. Again, looking for about 1,000 square meters in size. And then that privately owned, publicly accessible park, 500 square meters at the corner to satisfy the community benefit piece. In the last few weeks, we've received some renderings of what the stacked townhouses might look like. And as part of reviewing those renderings, you can see that there's a number of encroachments and projections that were incorporated that are sort of illustrated here. So the sunken patio would encroach into the front yard by 3 meters, the cornice and bay windows by about 0.6 meters, and the balconies and porticos by 2.1 meters. And although not identified, we'd also be expecting the stairs to encroach into that front yard as well. This slide illustrates the collective results of those encroachments and projections on a chunk of Rogers Street that I've used to illustrate this. The sunken patios would extend into the front yard by 3 meters. And so you're only left with, again, a grassy, what I'm calling the grassy front yard of 3 meters. In staff's opinion, this particular streetscape is very limiting in terms of the tree species that can be planted within that 3 meter buffer. And it also reduces the usable area for the front yard, which again is not really in keeping with the neighborhood, which has that 7.5 meter setback. In comparison, staff are recommending a 7 meter street line setback from Rogers Street and that would include a 5-meter buffer, as shown here. There would be no projections permitted within that landscape buffer. The sunken patios would be reduced from 3 meters down to 2 meters. And although we are kind of recommending or showing a 2-meter sunken patio, there is the ability for the developer to continue maintaining that 3-meter sunken patio. It would just mean that the units fronting onto Roger Street would have to be pulled back by an additional meter. The overall intent of all of these regulations is really to create a streetscape that more closely aligns with the neighborhood and provides for a larger area for that tree growth, as well as a small private area for the owners to be able to have and use. Similarly, staff recognize the fact that Moore Ave is a different road than Roger Street. It does have a larger right-of-way. It does have boulevards. So on that basis, we are supportive of the applicant's request for a 5-meter street line with a 3-meter landscape buffer. In terms of the staff recommendations, we are proposing to support a maximum density of 250 bedrooms per hectare and a minimum of 50% of those units to contain at least 2 bedrooms. That terrace and townhouse dwellings be permitted. We have added the townhouse dwellings just to provide greater flexibility within the zoning. Area A is to maintain the low-density residential designation and be rezoned holding general residence 1 and provide for that maximum height of 11 meters. Area B to be redesignated mixed-use medium-density residential and zoned holding multiple residence 6, providing for that maximum height of 20 meters. And then Area C to be redesignated open space and rezoned holding green 2. And then Area C2 specifically to function as that privately owned, publicly accessible space that I mentioned. As well, we'd be proposing to create a special provision area. The holding provisions within that special provision areas would be applied for a record of site condition, as well as a detailed noise study, and then demonstrating that the proposed development is consistent with the city's urban design guidelines and site-specific directives that are contained within the staff report. In terms of the recommended zoning provisions, we'd be looking at, again, setbacks from Roger Street of 7 meters and from Moore of 5 meters, a southerly lot line of 6 meters with exception to 35 meters of Moore Ave, which we'd be looking at 5 meters, a westerly lot line of 7.5 meters, and from any areas zoned green 2, we'd be looking at a 1.8 meter setback and a 5 meter setback from the apartment building. And then from any private roads, again, a 1.8 meter setback. The landscape buffer, 5 meters along Roger Street, 3 meters along Moore Ave. And then, again, the encroachments were ranging 2 meters for the sunken patios and porticos and cornice or bay windows, and then 3 meters for the stairs. In terms of parking, we are proposing the residential rate of 0.85 spaces per dwelling unit with the additional 0.1 spaces per dwelling unit for visitors and 0.6 spaces per dwelling unit for bicycles. In closing, I'd like to just thank the residents who did participate on the neighborhood working group. They did provide their time and very thoughtful comments, which were very much appreciated through the review of the plans and reports. Thank you.
Thank you again, Wendy. Always lots to know. Questions for staff at this point? Councillor Veith?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, just a couple of things just to be clearer or for clarification. That little the park where the signage will go, or the manufacturing Ontario Day, so that will be a public area, so the public are allowed to use it, but it's maintained and owned by the developer, correct? Is that
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, yes, we would be proposing that it would be publicly accessible, so the public would be able to use the space, but it would be privately owned.
So the private owner would be in charge of maintenance?
Correct.
Correct, okay. And because of the nature of that land, where what it was, who will be paying for any site cleanup that probably would have to be done? Would that be citizens or the developer?
In terms of site cleanup, do you mean
the site, like the
use
the land,
of the
the land and all that?
From a contamination perspective, yes. That would be a cost that's incurred fully by the developer.
Okay. And community benefits. Can you just does that mean parkland, or what? Can you just explain what community benefits are?
Sure, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So there's two pieces to these applications. There's the parkland dedication piece, which the city is entitled to under the Planning Act, and then there's a policy within our official plan that requires any developer coming forward and wishing to redesignate their lands from low density to a medium or a high density is required to demonstrate community benefits through any of this up designation, and those community benefits are intended to offset any of the impacts that might be associated with the increase in density that's anticipated in the neighborhood that would not have otherwise been realized without that change in density.
Well, just a little comment to that. I think that this whole development is a community benefit. That's my opinion right there. But anyway, thank you, Wendy, for your...
Next up, Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So this is interesting to me because we have one proposal coming from the developer and we have one coming from the city, right? So, and one of the questions that keeps coming up for me is, and I've had to deal with this in other areas in Uptown, when someone develops a property and they give us parkland money, what do we normally do with it? Does it tend to go back to that neighborhood, or does it go into a big pool of money?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I think because that's more of a historical question with respect to the city.
Mr. Rapp question?
I am going to defer
to one of our historical employees. Go ahead, Mr. Rapp.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, for the compliment. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Jurel. Currently, there are two accounts established for cash in lieu of parkland, one dedicated just for the Northdale area.
Yep.
And that came through an intermunicipal board decision and official plan policy, and then a separate account that is citywide. The intention under the Planning Act of Ontario is that monies received from a particular development should go back into that general geographic area, save and except for a citywide park that provides for the city as a whole, but generally it is to go back into that neighborhood. That's how it's supposed to happen. Historically, we've not been very successful in acquiring actual additional lands within neighborhoods to secure the parkland, so that has been difficult for us. In the past.
That's because it's an urban environment, right? So in order to acquire parkland, we have to buy a house. We were talking about this earlier. What has to happen then for us to actually get a park in an urban area?
Well, again, through you, Mayor Jaworski, what occurs is we receive the value of the land in the form of cash. That then places the burden, if you will, on the municipality to go and secure the parkland. To do that, we have to buy the land, but typically the land has a house on it. So we're also having to purchase the house because the person then ultimately, or the family, has to relocate. They're not just interested in the value of the land. So it does put us in a bit of a losing position, if you will, as each cash in lieu of parkland comes in. We're a little bit behind each time. For very small parcels, it works because we don't want just 20 square meters of land, but for larger parcels, we are recommending to secure the land because it makes sense for the neighborhood and economically for us as well.
Thank you. So this comes back to you then, Wendy. So when we're looking, and we know how difficult it is to acquire parkland in our already urban intensified areas, this is why our staff are saying, instead of going out and buying houses in this neighborhood and demoing them and creating a park, this entire area is going to be demoed, and so we could put a park here. Is that essentially how we've come to this conclusion?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, that's correct.
And could you go to the city's concept then, please?
Which one, sorry, are you?
I guess C is what we're looking at. So one of the things that I was curious about, and Mary Ellen Park, their ice pad has been very successful. Can you fit an ice pad into what I guess you're calling Parkland 1050?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I understand that the size of rinks is a little bit bigger than what is proposed in that mid-block park, but it would be something that a conversation with our parks people to see if we could fit something like an ice rink, a smaller version.
Okay. Okay. And another concern that had come up from neighbors was this is a very family. I mean, it's 8 to 80s in that neighborhood, and the idea that whoever's moving in here, they'd like to see some families, and so there was the idea that there should be larger 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, but skewing to the 3-bedroom and that's, it looks like in the report. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, yes, there is the requirement that we are proposing as part of the site-specific zoning regulations that 50%, at least 50% of the units contain at least 2 bedrooms or more. And there are, within any of the concepts proposed, there are a number of both 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So the 1 and 2 bedrooms are primarily in the apartment buildings, and then the 2 and 3 bedrooms are in the townhouses. So each of the stacked townhouses, from what I understand, the bottom unit will be a 2-bedroom, and the top unit will each be a 3-bedroom. So you're getting about 34 3-bedrooms and 34 2-bedrooms of the stacked towns.
And another concern that continues to come forward is the traffic. And so I tried to dive into the traffic study a little bit here. And from what I'm reading is it looks like there'll be approximately 80 to 79, there's sort of both, during the peak period. So 80, or maybe I've got these mixed up, but 80 in the morning and 79 in the peak periods. So essentially then, I'm not a mathematician, I'll just put that out there, but we're really talking about an extra car a minute during those peak periods. Am I getting the numbers right?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I'm also not a mathematician, but I do exactly that. The proposed development is expected to generate 80 new peak hour trips. Mm-hmm. And as I say, the intersections of Union and Roger and Moore and Roger were evaluated, and it was determined that there was sufficient road capacity for the additional cars anticipated.
And so just so that I'm understanding this right, then it's saying future total traffic, and maybe should I wait for the developer to come up next, or can you answer this one? Because it's saying 95th percentile.
Sorry, that's a bit of a modeling question. So yes,
Okay. That's okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe I'll just work backwards. Could you go to slide 19, please? I see an area C1 there, which is the proposed park. In another diagram, or maybe earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned about a walking path that goes and cuts through as a route to the Grand River Hospital LRT station. Well, how is that encapsulated in the go-forward plan?
to you, Mayor Jaworski. The city has desires to establish a walking path that would be created within Area C1 and lead back down to that southwest corner. But again, we're at the zoning stage, so it's very broad or higher level. That would be a detailed design that would be determined at site plan.
Okay, thank you. Slide 14. You talked a bit about the the Roger Street setback issue. Is anything predominantly different on Moore, like with the walkout patios and things like that? Is there an issue on Moore Street? We talked a lot about Roger, but I don't remember a lot about Moore and setbacks there.
To you, Mayor Jaworski, we do make a distinction between the different roads of Roger Street and Moore. Roger is a undersized right-of-way comparatively to Moore. Moore is a minor collector, which is really intended to move traffic through neighborhoods. In this instance, because it is a wider right-of-way, and as I say, it does have boulevards, so you see the sidewalks, and then on the other side of the sidewalk is that boulevard, so it's providing for a greater separation and opportunities for tree plantings and so forth. So for those reasons, we see it as a different streetscape than Roger Street.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Further questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you, Wendy. We have about 5 delegations registered tonight, 5 delegations registered tonight. First up is Glenn Shields of GSP Group, and everybody has 10 minutes, which if there were no question and answers, it'll take us 50 minutes. So if anybody has anything to say that's already been said, maybe you can kind of move past that. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor, members of Council. I'm here tonight on behalf of ODC and Reed's Heritage Homes. Reed's have recently put the ODC property under contract. They're in the due diligence and design phase right now, and certainly looking to move forward as they advance development concepts and as we move through this planning process. So we're here tonight to certainly support the staff recommendations to redesignate and rezone the site. However, we're going to ask for your consideration on a couple of matters, specifically the park and a couple of setbacks, and as we move through the presentation. We do have graphics and plans that have been updated over the past couple days, so they are different than what is in the staff presentation. And if you'll indulge me for 10 minutes, we'll walk through that and review that. Certainly, as Wendy indicated, we started this process over a year ago, and the ODC site is certainly unique. An industrial operation in a residential neighborhood dating back to the 1940s. It's been there for all those years, and now it's time. ODC is moving to a new facility in the north end of Waterloo, and it's time for this site to transition to a residential use. We had the informal public meeting here in these chambers. That was followed up, as Wendy indicated, by a neighborhood meeting that was certainly well attended in August. We had a number of working group meetings. We had ongoing discussions with city staff. Because we're on the border with the city of Kitchener, we also had a number of discussions with Kitchener staff, and they reviewed all the technical reports and so on. So there's certainly been a lot of discussion and a lot of work that has gone into the project. And I think I echo Wendy's sentiment that we had some good sessions with the neighborhood, maybe didn't agree on everything, but we certainly worked through it, discussed all the items, and I think at the end of the day, we've ended up with a different plan and a better plan. Those revisions, I won't go over in length. Wendy has covered them off, but you could see the major ones certainly are, if I can get this, yes, pointer. Certainly one of the big ones was in the original concept that we submitted, we had apartments, the end of which went out to Moore, and up in here, the end of which, even though this was only a 3-story apartment, the end went all the way out to Roger Street as well. And so that's one of the big changes we now have in the plan. The stacked townhouse units fronting all the way around on Moore and on Rogers Street, and then the apartment buildings set back in behind. The overall density has gone down from 300 to 250 bedrooms per hectare. We've looked at widening the street, as Wendy indicated. Come on, here we go. Along through here, Roger will be widened, and that'll provide the opportunity for new sidewalk and on-street parking. We proposed to widen it along here as well, but the neighbors said we'd like to keep it the way it is and keep some of the trees there, so we removed that, and we removed a proposed widening on Moore as well. So the townhouses have decreased in height as well. We had originally asked for 12 meters in height. We're now at 11 meters. There was a presentation that was made at the informal meeting about retaining some of the interesting art moderne facade of the office component of the ODC building, and we've looked at doing that and incorporating that into the park at the corner of Roger and Moore Streets in this area through here. We had originally asked for the possibility for commercial uses on the ground floor to make a mixed-use community, but in response to the neighbors, we removed that as well. And we've had lots of discussion with city staff about setbacks from the streets, and we are proposing to have a 7-meter setback from Rogers Street to these units, as staff have recommended, and a 5-meter setback along Moore. The technical studies as well have been reviewed by city staff, and so the site is serviceable. The traffic studies as well have been submitted. They've been reviewed by city staff here and the city of Kitchener as well, because Moore obviously goes across the boundary, and those studies have been reviewed and concurred by the staff people in the traffic departments. So from that perspective, we've got a site that is certainly workable. And this is our this is our current concept plan that we have worked through of late. I think the big thing to note is, again, the setbacks along Moore and Rogers Street, and then also the park at the corner. And I'm eventually going to get this cursor to work. So when we originally started, we proposed, if I go back to that previous plan, we had a park area in here of about 500 square meters or so. Those two plans, A and B, we submitted back a month and a half ago, had a park of about 850 square meters there. This plan has a park area of about 1,200 square meters, plus or minus. And that is the equivalent of the parkland dedication contribution for a project of this scale. As well, having Reed's involved, they've engaged Martin Simmons Architect to work on their behalf to look at the stacked townhouse units and the apartment units back in behind. And as you can see, the building elevations are really progressing well. It's a very nice brownstone kind of feel, a very contemporary yet traditional feel. Emphasis been placed on not only coming up with a really attractive streetscape, but taking the mass of the building and working through vertical and horizontal projections and bays and stepping at the top to break up that building mass and to create, I think, a very attractive and urban streetscape for the Midtown area. So in terms of providing that park or community space, you know, as Wendy's proposal before you in the PowerPoint had the three options. We originally started again at the corner staff asked us to look at this option and option A. What would that look like with a park down at the corner? And it would be about 1,000 meters or so, so a little under what would be the parkland contribution. It is somewhat constrained, and it does have an overlook from the end of the apartment building there. We're working through the grading on the site right now, but we haven't got final grades, but the site does fall away as you go from Rogers Street back into the site, so it's not ideal from that perspective, but it certainly could be a park option. At the corner, you're left with a very limited amount of space in that option. Option C was, again, the combination, and staff's proposal was to create something in the order of about 500 square meters at the corner, and then the same amount of public park space over on the northwest side. That has the largest amount of space. Certainly it's above and beyond what the parkland dedication would be, and also, in our opinion, is the least efficient because you're spreading your efforts between two pieces of property. And if we save the building facade, it does get a little squeezed in that space as well. So this plan was recently created, and we're looking at enlarging that corner park so that it's about 1,200 square meters in size, and it's really combining those two park or public spaces into one that's bigger and, in our opinion, most efficient and effective. So again, we've got about 1,200 meters up from 800 meters, and in this area, this is going to be the flattest part of the site along those two streets at the corner. So that gives us the greatest flexibility. We can take the ODC facade and reconstruct that at the corner. But I think our biggest point here is that we've got enough space that we can create a wonderful multifunctional public space. And we've got enough land here that we could do play areas and equipment for kids. We've got the ability to have sitting areas both back in as well as along the street. We've got the ability to create gardens. We've got the ability to create some hard court areas or small plaza spaces. So we've got really, I think, a great opportunity here to create something that'll be a real focal point for the community, something that'll be attractive, as Councillor Laurel said, for people 8 to 80 years old. And what we're proposing to do is, create a privately owned, privately constructed, and privately maintained space here, but with public accessibility. So there'd be an easement placed over top of it that would give the public access to this. And that's an approach that the city has used recently, I understand, in the Carriage Crossing neighborhood, where the parks there have been developed on a private basis. So from our perspective, we think that's a pretty significant community benefit. The design, the cost to design, the cost to construct, as well as the ongoing maintenance cost is handled by the private sector and is not something that the city would have to look at. As Wendy indicated, the concepts that she showed for the corner were ones that we had prepared early on in the process. It was a much smaller space, but it was clear from talking to staff that what we wanted to do here was something more extensive and something that would probably have higher maintenance costs than what the city would typically do. So by doing this approach in a private and public partnership, we can do something that's more extensive and have, I think, a really great sense of place for the community. The comment about kids playing in this area, certainly a valid comment, but one really that you still have at the other site as well, but one you can address through design. So whether it's a combination of a small fence along the edge, or as in this case, planting, or a small berm along through here, there's ways that you can create a wonderful space in here and contain it to the extent you need to from the streets and the street edges. We recently had an open house at the ODC offices last week, and there was certainly some support shown by those who left comments for the park. And I think the thing that people liked again was the centrality and the multifunctional nature of what we can do here on this important corner. And you know, I think the opportunities again, we can do hard court areas, we can throw up a basketball net, areas that can be programmed for other neighborhood functions and festivals and markets and those kind of things. We got room for kids' play areas. We've got some open lawn area. We can design it so that it can be seasonal as well. Maybe as well look at a rink. You know, we haven't got to that level of detail yet, but those are all possible things that we could do here. In terms of the proposed regulations, we submitted a letter on Friday. We asked for a series of setback adjustments, but we've had some further discussions with staff, and this is going to be an iterative process, perhaps not dissimilar than the previous application you had, where as we go through this process, we're going to have more information. We're going to be dealing with some of the technical issues like grading. So what we are certainly prepared to work with right now are the regulations that are recommended before you. And as we get into the detailed design, I think we have an understanding that if there's some good rationale for making some small adjustments, instead of 2 meters, we may need 2.4. We can work through with staff and make those adjustments as we go forward. So there's really just a slight adjustment to the parking regulation that we want to work with right now. In terms of streetscapes, we are proposing a 7-meter setback. Whether the planting area is 5 meters as recommended or we adjust it a bit. We certainly do have enough planting area to create a very attractive street edge here and have room for some hedge planting along by the courtyards and for some good street tree planting along Rogers Street as well. The buildings, I think, are really starting to evolve, and in conjunction then with that green forecourt and the street tree planting, I think we'll have a very attractive edge to the community. The building, as we've requested, is 11 meters in height, and we think that scale is appropriate and works in the neighborhood. Given the setbacks proposed from the street and the setbacks on the opposite side, there certainly is quite a separation between units across the street, and we have an appropriate scale that works. Keeping in mind as well that the current official plan policies and zoning regulations on the site do permit buildings up to 10.5 meters in height. So our increase in building height is modest. The apartment buildings as well are at the back. They'll certainly be subject to some more detailed design, but the intent is to come up with a building elevation that's going to fit into the community as well in terms of materiality and its design. So in terms of conclusions, excuse me, this is certainly a unique site, and we think a unique opportunity for an infill development that is in fact quite close to the LRT station at about 350 meters away. We think this is an appropriate and sensitive redevelopment of a brownfield site. We can provide a range of housing on site, and was mentioned earlier through the questioning. There will be a significant number of 2- and 3-bedroom units because of the stacked townhouse form. It was interesting last week at the open house as well to see a number of seniors come through, and they were asking about the site and the type of units and the size and when they'd be started and so on. And it was clear from talking to them that they were looking for alternatives to their house in the neighborhood. They like the neighborhood. They're looking for an opportunity to stay there and downsize and move into smaller units. So those opportunities would be there as well. But I think a really unique community benefit here is the provision of family-oriented housing in a central neighborhood, close to uptown, close to downtown Kitchener, and close to the LRT system. And if you recall back to the informal meeting we had a year ago, Professor Don Parker from the University of Waterloo talked about that missing middle in the housing market, and I think there's an opportunity to address that kind of housing here. So the plan has certainly evolved, and this is the culmination of all of those activities, and I think we've got a plan that provides a great range of housing, and especially a really exciting multi-purpose public space at the corner. The community benefits, I think are certainly numerous here. The park space obviously is one. We're replacing industry with more compatible residential use. It is a brownfield site, so the site is being cleaned up, and we are providing the road widening, the family-oriented units, car sharing space, and certainly a pathway system. So there are these two options for the park system. Our preference is for option B with the parameters that we certainly indicated, and we think that, again, fits with this site and fits with the unique opportunity that we've got here with the site in this Midtown neighborhood. In terms of zoning regulations, there was a westerly side yard setback, and that is over in this location here. We were asking for 4 meter setback here, which in conjunction with the existing setback on this property, we think would be a reasonable solution. We've had some further discussions with staff, and if the park goes in the corner location, they'd be looking for a little additional space there, and we're amenable to certainly changing that to from 4 meters to 5 meters. The parking rate is similar to what was suggested by staff or supportable by staff at 0.95 per unit. We just wanted the amount of visitor space changed so that it's a smaller amount, and that's oriented to the apartment units. Each of these townhouses have a rear garage. That's something I forgot to mention. There will be a rear lane, and there is a garage and a driveway at the back for each of these units. So we're able to take care of the individual townhouse parking back here and create a wonderful streetscape because we don't have to worry about garages and driveways at the front end. And then the only other request we have tonight is with respect to item C8, and again that was with respect to the pedestrian routes through the site, and all we're asking for is that the location and details of the routes or route, whatever it works out to be, actually be determined at the site plan stage. The current recommendation on page 41 is quite prescriptive. We think we don't have all the information we need right now to do that. There's certainly a commitment to provide the pathway, but we have to work through site grading, the type of units, the location of these units, and what makes the most sense to create an accessible and safe pathway system through the site. So those are our remarks to you tonight. I apologize, Mr. Mayor, for going over time.
Well, it is our complex one. It's our first time we actually have this situation. We actually have two options on the table.
It
so
is.
Thank you very much.
But I do like your little clock a lot better than Kitchener. The Kitchener
Oh, it's
one,
very big. Yeah.
It's this big, and it's in your face.
Yeah. No, thank you, Glenn. We do have some questions already. Councillor Durrell and Councillor Veith.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, through you. Thank you, Glenn, for this report for us. I think let's start with our staff are recommending something that is not what you're interested in at this point. So what happens if as a council we agree with our staff and not you? What does that mean for this proposal?
Well, it means we'll have to sit down and work through that option. If that's the option council prefers, then we'll have to make the best of that. We think this is just a really unique opportunity. And at the end of the day, I think there's more to be gained by doing the corner park.
Okay, and you had brought up traffic, and so I'm just going to check my math in. So at 160 trips over approximately 4 hours, 2 hours in the morning peak, 2 hours in the afternoon at peak, we're looking at about 1 extra car a minute. Am I getting this right?
I have not got the traffic report with me. I apologize. So I'll take your numbers, and if it is 80 over a peak hour, then it is.
Councillor Henry, keep that to yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
It would be then, yes, just over a trip per minute.
Yeah, okay. So 1 extra car a minute during those 2 peak periods is essentially what we're coming to. Okay. This slanting of the property, it's kind of the first I've really heard of this. So can you give me a little bit more information on this? The slope, sure. Slant slope.
The property is interesting and challenging somewhat from that regard. So as you drive down the street, come on, cursor. As you drive down the street, it's relatively level through here and relatively level here. It's going down a little bit as you come this way. But in fact, when you're here and then go down the driveway and back in, you can really appreciate the site drops dramatically in this direction through here. And that change in grade is about...
It's about 4 meters. But I think along Roger Street from the corner to 93 is a 3 meter drop.
Yeah. So it's about 4 meters in that direction I had going diagonally across the site. And then when you come from Roger Street, come on, cursor, here we go, coming back this way, the site also drops off this way about 3 meters or so. And as you come down from Moore, it drops back down this way as well, a couple of meters. So this is low point down here and high point up here. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why putting the apartments back here certainly works well. We're blocking views from the street into the apartments, and they're sitting down, if you will, a little bit in here in the low point of the site.
Okay. So if it's 4 meters from Roger to the back, then these 6 meter apartments are actually quite, you can knock 4 meters off if you're standing at Roger. Is that essentially?
Generally, yeah. We haven't got the final grading done, but the site will be graded. It'll be terraced. It'll be coming in off the street down at a couple of different levels.
Okay. I think that's all I've got right now. Thank you.
Councillor Reith and Councillor Whaley.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, thank you, Glenn, for your presentation. And it seems like there's been a lot of, working together and compromise, and that we're basically on the same page except for the parks, right? So on this, this is the first time on item B here, the picture, that's been that's new, right? The bigger park rather than the smaller one at the corner and another one on the other side. So what about the number of units? What's the difference in number of units? Because probably, with the number C, you would have to eliminate some townhouses, and I'm not sure how many, but in option B, is it the same number of units that would be, you would lose by making that park bigger? Or how many is? What's the plus or minus? Yep. Probably the minus in option B.
The two concepts are
I think in Wendy's presentation it said 242 versus 244, but I'm not sure if that's the same options. Oh, Joel has information. Go ahead, Joel.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. Based on our quick math, our recommended version, which is option B, has one fewer unit than option C has one fewer stacked unit than option B.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's similar, but B is a little more efficient.
So you're losing one less unit with your preferred option.
I believe it'll be two because they're stacked units, right? So they're one on top of the other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one module is on here is 2 units. Yeah, yeah.
This makes sense. Councillor Whaley.
It's a question of staff, Mayor.
Okay, and any further questions, delegates? Councillor Henry.
Sure. Glenn, thanks for the detailed presentation, plus 75%. I was wondering, I can see the clerk's clock as well, same clock that you had. Not everybody has that vantage point, but the one advantage of sitting in this seat closest to the media is I can see what your time is too. So you've talked about the different park options, and given that's the significant point of disagreement between the applicant's planners, yourselves and staff planners, I think that's useful to spend some time on. From what I heard, your combined park is on the order of about 1,200 square meters. From what I recall of Wendy's presentation, we had sort of about 1,000 square meters. That was about 170, 200 meters deficient. So we needed about 1,200 to meet the parkland dedication standard.
Yes.
And so the combination of the 1,000 over there and the whatever it was on the other side created a net community benefit of 500 square meters above the parkland dedication requirement. So I've got all that about right, within a thumb from, okay. So I'm curious then, if what I'm hearing you're offering, your client is offering in concept B is effectively the parkland dedication that we're permitted to take overall, and then it's subject to negotiation for where it goes on the site. So I'm curious how you're defining the net community benefit then in that case from the shift from the low to medium density residential. I think I know the answer to this, but I didn't hear you explicitly say it, and I think it would be helpful to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so the land area is the equivalent of the park dedication, but the proposal is to have the developer design the park, to build the park, to reinstate the wall, and to provide ongoing maintenance. So adding those up, and especially the ongoing maintenance that could be taken care of by the condominium corporation next door, is a significant financial contribution.
And if I was the record, I'd add it up over 30 years and create a really big number. If I could add it up over 99 years or 1 year, and you can make all sorts of numbers from that, all of which are true. Let me ask you about the other thing that you've identified as the regulation change that you're looking for in terms of the parking difference. I mean, this really feels like I'm not sure exactly how thin we're slicing a 0.85 plus 0.1 versus 0.9 plus 0.05 as a point of dispute that we're still having. Can you help me understand where that's coming from? Because from the note that you sent us earlier today to what was earlier done to now, almost all of the differences of setbacks, except for a couple, mostly related to parks, have come away, but that one remains. So can you help me understand that?
Certainly. Is it a small slice? It is. It's not a huge item, but it does have some bearing on the apartment buildings and the provision of parking for individual units, and then how much must be dedicated as visitor parking. In our mind, the requested regulation would provide more visitor parking, much more visitor parking than we think is going to be necessary here. So it's not a huge item by any stretch, but an important one when it comes down to designing the underground parking underneath there and the surface parking as well beside it.
Okay, and I think we're moving to staff questions, so thank you, Glenn.
Thank you very much.
First up, Councillor Whaley, then I'll have some.
Mike, a couple of questions with respect to option C, Wendy, and the Westerly Interior Park. My understanding is that the plan is for, or if we approve it, then that this piece of parkland will be donated to the city and it becomes a city-owned park.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, that would be correct.
So would that mean that the city would be responsible for contamination remediation for that portion of the park?
Again, through you, Mayor Jaworski, no, the contamination would be addressed as part of the record of site condition that the owner is currently working towards obtaining.
Are you aware if there's a brownfield tax incentive grant as part of the mix here?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that the last bit.
Brownfield tax incentive grant, the TIG.
Yes. Have they got an application in?
Yes.
No, I'm not aware. Maybe that's a question that the applicant can respond to.
Somebody want to nod their head over there on the applicant side?
No application.
Thank you.
Questions I have for Wendy is the facade that the facade they're reconstructing, the Ontario Dye Company facade that, you know, really, I remember in the informal meeting other comments from citizens they really like. That has been to Heritage Committee, is that correct?
To you, Mayor Jaworski, that's correct.
And so what did the Heritage Committee have to say about that? Because I think one of the catch-22s we're in here is the fact that we need to keep a facade on the site because the Heritage Committee and citizens liked it, but it's really a community benefit, not a park. So maybe just talk a bit about what the Heritage Committee had to say about it.
Sure. My understanding is what the Heritage Committee had wanted the building itself to be more of a retention or a retain or a reuse of some sort. The applicant has indicated that that was not quite possible based on structural integrity. The park itself went back to the Heritage Committee for review, and their comment was that while it really isn't a full retention or deemed to be conserving the ODC, they did appreciate the extra effort that was brought forward in terms of providing a commemorative piece.
Okay, so they really looked, but they saw the parquet, so to speak, as a whole, not just the facade itself.
That is correct.
But they were probably speaking of the facade itself.
Yes.
Which won't be in its, which may or may not be in its exact same location.
Certainly the developer has indicated that the facade would actually have to be removed and reconstructed.
And may or may not be in the same exact location too.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the proposed park, and this might be for Commissioner Dykstra, we heard about privately owned parks in the city, such as by Rim Park. Once a park is in privately owned hands, what about the local citizens around there, who obviously aren't part of that condo corporation or whatever, wanted to say, you know, hey, can we put up a ice rink on the park that's not ours? How can that work? Has that been done before?
To answer your question, Mayor, Carriage Crossing, we own the land there, and so any the maintenance is undertaken by the developer condo board at that location. Any changes, any improvements, any new considerations are all reviewed by park operations staff.
So we own that land.
Correct.
Different than what's being proposed here at this corner.
Correct.
Is there a situation in the city today that is like this corner?
Nothing's coming to my knowledge. We do have situations where we lease parkland from private owners for our use, and we manage that, but no location where they're maintaining it for the good of the community that comes to mind.
Okay, and then finally on the, if this was to be our land, we would not normally have physical structures on it like a wall or facade.
at some locations we do have, but we would minimize the structure of it and make it very light compared to what I've seen today.
Okay. I saw other questions go up. Councillor Henry, then Councillor Maven, did you? Councillor Henry, Councillor Maven.
Thank you, Mayor. And while we're on Commissioner Dykstra on the hot seat, I appreciate this is a planning matter, but ultimately this question ends up putting something into the lap of community services, who houses our park strategy and has to deal with this to understand how that and our neighborhood strategy. So I was wondering if Commissioner Dykstra could shed some light on the view of his department on the question that will be before council at the close of the formal public meeting in terms of which park option is preferred by staff, and if he could elucidate us on why.
Great. Through Mayor to Councillor Henry. A couple of key points when we've looked at this proposal, and I do acknowledge I haven't seen all the details of today's proposal, but what is before council with option C, from our perspective, we looked at that from a couple of points. Staff did. We recognize the focus on the fact that the transition between green space this provides between the existing residents and the new built form is positive from our perspective and support of initiatives that IPPW are supporting here. We also found that the options here with C enabled us to get the linkages down to the Mount Hope Cemetery, so that was another consideration that we felt we could support this design. We looked at the benefit of the corner park, and whereas that is maintained and would be built from the developer, that does offer those more intimate spaces and gathering spaces. This location could offer some more passive recreation, the ability to have a green space for kicking the ball, which would be, and throwing a ball around, which would be in a more safe location versus the intersection at a major thoroughfare there on Moore Ave. So those being some of the key points that around the transition space, the safety space, an alternative form of recreation to occur there, and also the linkages down to Mount Hope Cemetery, from our department's perspective, would be supported by C.
Councillor Maven, please.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and through you to staff. So on option B, you have consolidated park space. And I've just heard some good arguments of why that isn't necessarily better in option C, which sort of screws up my plan. But one thing about having the property privately owned is that much different than what we have in neighborhood associations in, say, the Beechwood area, where they own the parks, they maintain the parks, they pay for the parks?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Maven, the difference being there that general public access is not available at those locations, primarily a fenced tennis courts, fenced pool, with the membership piece being the key point of entry or use at those locations in Beechwood.
Right, and I guess I'm assuming that perhaps the owners of the new owners of these properties may well want those parks to be private rather than public.
Not wanting to speculate, but that could be an option to them in the future. Planning may have further comments on through covenants and the overall site plan, how they would enable that through legal means. Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And so I'm still seeing the consolidated parkland being, all the costs are being taken care of by the private sector, for infinity, I assume, and the other side doesn't. Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll actually move into the people who have real opinions here. 5 delegates coming up. First up is Marcus Mouse. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here tonight, Your Worship, Council. And also thank you to Wendy Fisher and the applicant and everybody that's worked on this proposal. It looks like obviously a lot of hard work has gone into this. As a point of disclosure, I'd just like to say that I am a resident in the local neighborhood. I live in Kitchener, just across the boundary, but I'm also a registered professional planner, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Planning at Waterloo. What I'd like to talk to you today about is that the justifications that are being used to put forth proposals like these, and those are connectivity to the LRT, that comes up a lot, as is growth management, as is densification. The key in those policies is to try and get people on transit, walking, and cycling. Otherwise, we're just adding density into neighborhoods without actually achieving that goal. I'd like to ask that you evaluate this proposal in how well will it contribute to getting people onto those alternative modes. Not to say that it shouldn't have parking or that it shouldn't have cars, but how far is it going to actually helping Waterloo position itself as a community that is meeting its active transportation goals? So the situation is that we've established through provincial and other legislation is that there's a need for infill, higher residential densities to curb sprawl for various fiscal, environmental, and social reasons. High-rises are often, CBON desirable. They don't go in established neighborhoods. And so the context-sensitive density is what is today recommended by the staff report. The problem as I see it is that adding this kind of density will add cars, which will actually make the neighborhood less desirable for walking and cycling because you're increasing the volume of cars and associated safety concerns. It's not just about the volume, but it's also about the speeding that happens on more, especially if we're widening roads. We also make density unattractive to neighbors by kind of putting parking spaces front and center of the design so that people, yes, we removed them off the main street, we put them behind the buildings, but we've designed this, to me it seems like this is the design being put forth is one where people live in the units, go downstairs, get in their cars and go somewhere else. We've heard a lot of talk about the two, what I'll call marginal park spaces on the fringe of the site. Who are they supposed to be for? Families? We heard about family units. So where are the families going to go down? All this, the 200 new units, roughly speaking. So where are all the families going to go play if it actually catches on in that way? So I want to sort of ask these questions and say, well, there's not these problems, but there's solutions. We know how to deal with this. This is not new. Lots of cities, and we've even done it in places in Waterloo. We can make upgrades to the infrastructure nearby to encourage cycling, walking. We can think about traffic calming. And we can think about the site design that actually creates the kind of density people will enjoy living in as opposed to just want to get in their car and drive away from it. We could even, I would argue, allow a bit more density on the site than what is currently being proposed by the developer and the city, and thus help pay for more underground parking and infrastructure upgrades in the surrounding area. Here's one of the proposals we've seen. I would argue one could add another apartment building in there, but actually turn the in-between spaces into green space if parking was moved underground, allowing residents to actually step outside. Replace the sort of tunnel vision of this development with the facades you just saw from the developer, and imagine that could be an interior courtyard space, not as boxy as this perhaps. It's just meant to give an overall example. But that's what's being built in other places to keep families in higher density places, is interior green space where people can actually spend time, see their kids play, and so forth. Here's just another example. And you achieve this by moving parking underground and reducing parking ratios. Connectivity to nearby transit and active transportation. This diagram should look familiar, might look familiar. It's actually from one of the City of Waterloo documents. But if we're going to say that the reason we want to allow more density in this neighborhood is so that people will use the LRT and connect with active transport to the uptown, we should be building the facilities to actually facilitate that, right? Explicit cycling lanes. What about the path to the LRT? I think that's a great idea. That's going to be actually probably the main connector from that neighborhood by the site to that LRT stop by the Grand River Hospital. I'd like us to think more about how it will be maintained in the winter. Will it be wide enough to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists? Will there be lighting for nighttime when people are returning off the LRT and going through parts of the cemetery and then cutting through, hopefully, what will be a community trail? Here's the site in the corner there circled. What I've put an arrow on there is where the traffic calming stops in the neighborhood, just before the City of Waterloo boundary. There's a precedent actually on Moore there for traffic calming, and somehow it's stopped between from that point where the arrow goes down to Union. Why not at minimum suggest traffic calming in the immediate vicinity of the site to ease the concerns of neighbors about how fast these cars will be going when many of their kids will be walking to the school that's just down the road. Yes, we can think about this as a minor collector as we've talked about it, but on a day-to-day, this is a way to school, this is a way to go to the grocery store, this is a way to ride your bike to the park, to connect to the spur line where that arrow, if the first arrow there ends, right? So how will we actually use this development as an opportunity for community benefits in this broader sense? So I would like you to consider, or I ask you to consider, off-site issues are not considered separate from the new development. Council could set a standard for what developers need to provide in neighborhoods if they want more density in existing low-density areas. The development is, of course, indeed on private property, but impacts of the design have public impact on the surrounding areas. I think Council needs to ask for strong designs that will allow future residents to live active, transit-oriented lifestyles and make their home locally so they don't need to drive to the park or school or just play with their kids outside. And I say that not to be anti-car, but I say that because the LRT and growth management and all these tools are actually being used as the very justification for permitting more density. So I recommend that Council in some form require traffic calming on Moore and Roger, or Roger and Moore, that's the James Bond intersection as I like to call it, as part of the project to reduce speed on local streets. Council put forward site design guideline requirements to move most parking underground, to support site design that creates actual usable open space for the future residents. For instance, it's just one option, but interior courtyards are something that are being explored in many places and have a track record for doing that. And also Council put in place a plan as part of the rezoning to upgrade active transportation infrastructure in the area, to enhance connectivity of the site to near amenities, school, LRT, because that, again, is the justification for supposedly allowing the density in the first place. But I also think we can revisit the appropriate density and the design on the site. Medium density probably appropriate, but my assessment would be that it could probably actually support a bit more density than what I'm currently seeing in what's proposed by the developer and by the city. I think I'm reminded of what Brent Toderen, former chief planner of the city of Vancouver and now globally known planning consultant, says about density. It says it's not about density, it's about density done well, right? It's about how you designed this density, and I think the developers have come a far way in this case to work with the residents to change the look of the density, but it's also about how the density is situated and contextualized in the neighborhood. One of my colleagues, Pierre Finley, likes to talk about the tower in the park model, right? Is you put high-rise, in this case not a high-rise, but you add more density into parks so that people can enjoy them. He says all too often this model turns into density or high-rise tower in the parking lot. What I'm seeing here is not a high-rise tower, but I'm certainly seeing density surrounded by parking. Is that truly in line with the visions put forth by the documents that are being referenced to justify this development? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Marcus. That's like a free 8-minute TED Talk there, so thank you very much for that. Got our money's worth there. Questions for Marcus at this time? Yeah. That's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering, following on the conversation around various policy tools and suggesting connections beyond just a Planning Act decision to broader decisions, do we have a sense of whether our general official plan policies in this regard are supportive and connected in thinking about linking these kinds of things at this time, or is that an upgrade that is something we could consider in the future as part of another process to more explicitly link this as something we can consider in this kind of density change?
Go ahead.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Henry. Perhaps the best approach to deal with some of the suggestions the delegation had mentioned is the traffic master plan. Not the regions, but the City of Waterloo will be undertaking a new transportation master plan, which should be looking at all modes of transportation, active modes, right-of-way standards, widths, all of those things, and that might be the best avenue to look at those type of options. And that can then lead to ultimately further zoning changes in the comprehensive bylaw. Well, not necessarily the next iteration, but we can do some fine tuning as a result of that transportation master plan.
Let me follow up a bit further. I take the point that if there is a challenge, and I look to the ward councillor on this, but if there is a challenge in terms of active and safe routes to school and the rest that exists today, irrespective of the development, that suggests, subject to funds and priority setting, that's an area that we would have interest in regardless of whether this happens. And this might just encourage us to prioritize at a higher level than we otherwise would. Not that it would suggest we should now do it where we shouldn't have before. But I guess what I was really getting at was, I know when we ask applicants to do a traffic impact assessment, it usually comes up with things like, well, we need a turn lane here, it needs 20 meters of storage, and this road needs to be such and such, and therefore, because that's an increment because of the development, we require the developer to pay for those upgrades. To the extent that traffic calming may become more desirable as a result of increased density, do we have the tool today through that kind of impact analysis to make that a requirement of site development? Or is that something we would need to think about and consider as part of future processes that we will not see in the next couple of weeks or months, because there's a bunch of stuff that we really need to land soon, but in the next iteration?
Again, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. Currently, we do not have the tools to go with some of the suggestions made by a delegation. When you start straying from beyond the actual lands being contemplated within a zone change, you start growing into gray area where you really need justification. We are allowed to go beyond, but it really needs to be justified, and that is needed in both policy or through technical documents to allow us to start going beyond the site itself.
So that sounds like the next municipal comprehensive review is a time for conversation on some of those. So.
Or as noted, the transportation master plan.
Perfect.
Because I do think that will have significant changes in our overall transportation network.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none. Next delegate up is Carl Simpson. I have it here that you're representing the Neighborhood Working Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I do have the shortest PowerPoint presentation I've ever made, and it's very low tech. You've seen some glossier images this evening. So I was a member, or I am a member of the Neighborhood Working Group, and I want to thank Wendy Fisher for the opportunity to provide input into this application. And I want to thank her for the hard work she's done in preparing the report that you have this evening. Now, as I'm speaking as a delegate for a group of, I am speaking as a delegate for a group of local residents. 100 households have asked to be added to our mailing list to receive updates about the ODC's proposal, and a clear majority of those voices have asked that the zoning for this development be assigned a low density designation. Councillors and the Mayor should have received their collective comments to the development by email this weekend. And it was about 20 pages long, and in fact, in those 20 pages, only 2 people have said that they're in favor of the medium density zoning. We're fortunate as a neighborhood to have many experts in fields that include water management, urban design, real estate, and law, and probably lots of other. And we've drawn on this collective expertise in shaping our concerns. I just want to highlight 3 points in the report that you're considering this evening. We haven't had a lot of time to go through the report. I commend you folks because you have more than one report to go through, that you've made it through it. But the 3 points that I'll focus on are, first is the benefit to the neighborhood as a justification for zoning and official plan changes. The second is the claim that the development complements the neighborhood. And the third is about what I call split zoning. And we've seen maps of that, so I do have a slide of that, so you'll know what that means. So given that the application isn't consistent with the goals and objectives of the City of Waterloo's official plan, in that it requires intensification and our intensification and infill policies. The report argues that with sufficient justification, the application may be approved. Justification in the form of demonstrable community benefits, and we've been hearing about that this evening. So on page 21, the report assesses where there is a demonstrable community benefit associated with the application. I think rightly the report rejects the first two rationales. There's a list of 5 rationales that were offered by the applicant. So it rejects the first two. But the third should also be rejected. This is the claim that widening Rogers Street with lay-by parking will provide traffic calming and provide additional parking for the neighborhood. Widening a street will never provide traffic calming, unless maybe in the form of the reduction of road rage, which currently isn't a problem on Rogers Street. The plan also calls for an additional 8 parking spots to be used by the residents of the development. Since 8 cars currently can park along this stretch of Rogers Street, no extra parking spots are being provided, and competition for the 8 spots will be dramatically increased. So really on 2 counts, this is not a benefit to the neighborhood. The fourth rationale on that list, which is the inadequacy of parkland, I know will be covered by another delegation, so I won't talk about it. And I won't speak to the 5th rationale, that is that 2- and 3-bedroom units will appeal to families, other than to say that there is no fixed guarantee of 3-bedroom units in the report. So we've heard a little discussion about 2 and 3, particularly 3-bedroom units appealing to families, but truly there's nothing in the proposal that would require 3-bedroom units. The second point I'll speak to is the claim in the executive summary that, I quote, "The proposed development as recommended complements the existing character of the neighborhood by incorporating various design elements that exist within the neighborhood and by ensuring that the street edges maintain the character of and compatibility with the existing streetscape." I think, in fact, there's no demonstration of this. Among other things, the existing character of the neighborhood includes steep pitched roofs and 7-meter setbacks. The proposed changes fail to include either of these elements, instead allowing stacked townhouses, which is a built form that does not currently exist in the neighborhood, of 11 meters is dramatically different from the existing characteristics. The report notes that average building heights on Roger is 7 meters and on Moore is 6. So let me see if I can get you my first. There you go, high-tech drawing. The house on the right is my own because I actually know the proportions of it. The house on the left is a typical sort of 1.5-story bungalow, or 1.5-story house in the neighborhood. There are many of these sort of throughout the neighborhood. So it's about 6 meters high. My house is about 7 meters high. The big block in the middle is not an apartment building. That's the townhouse at 11 meters that's being proposed. And I know that Glenn did show us an overlay. much better drawing than mine, but I think you can see the massing here. And what I want to point out is the pitched roofs. So the average is 7 meters, right? These heights include roof pitches as well as walls. When the zoning for low density was developed, houses were built with pitched roofs, so the height limits were set accordingly. Houses would be limited to 2 stories or as 3 with dormers in the attic. Dormers in the attic is typical of the Mary Allen neighborhood, where houses are generally a bit bigger than in my neighborhood. Using a flat roof means that an additional full story can be squeezed into the 10.5 meter zoned height. Adding an extra ½ meter only exacerbates this incompatibility. Of course, the zoning rules can be changed, but it is disingenuous to say the result conforms, complements, or is compatible with the existing neighborhood. Call it what it is. A zoning change to allow stacked townhouses is an intrusion into the neighborhood. So here I've overlaid my house over the conceptual drawing that's on the last page of the report from Wendy. So the stacked townhouse is 11 meters. My house, including pitched roof, is 7. So you can see it's considerably smaller than what's being proposed. There seems to be, and I have, just as a comparative, I'm not actually recommending this design, but here's a row house that has stacked roofs, sloped roofs. So you can see that the scale, if you have a pitched roof, brings the structure down considerably. So it's I think, sort of a way of, I use the word cheating just in a sort of a loose sense, right? To put in a flat roof and squeeze in an extra floor or 2. So there seems to be some wrangling between city staff and the applicant over setbacks and encroachments. GR1 standard setback is 7.5 meters, and this seems to be pretty consistent along Rogers Street. As noted in the report, it's around 5 meters on Moore. And as noted by Wendy, the applicant is asking for significant encroachments into that 7-meter setback, as much as 3 meters, with staff recommending 2 meters for most encroachments and 3 for stairs. But this suggests to us that the applicant is trying to squeeze too much onto the space. Intensification shouldn't mean overcrowding. The applicant should follow the requirements of zoning for both designations, effectively drawing internal boundary lines at the setbacks and designing with and for that space, rather than keep trying to move out a little bit. It is one thing to ask for a zoning change, but another to ask for multiple concessions under the new designation. Minimizing setbacks, coupled with increased height and width, that is the row housing, I can go back to that one, exaggerates the increased massing of the proposed townhouses. So this certainly doesn't conform with the neighborhood. I should go back one. The top row and the bottom row are actually Google's streetscape views of Rogers Street and Moore Street that would be facing the development. So just give you a little, you can sort of get a sense of how much space there is there. My third point has to do with a curious feature of the split zoning, the GR1 and the MR6. The applicant is asking that the south and west sides of the property be zoned MR6 so that 6-story apartment blocks may be built. They are not asking that the core of the property be zoned MR6. They've not submitted concept plans with a high-rise building in the core. There was just a suggestion that that could happen. Nor has the city at any time suggested increased density here. Yet the recommendation is to zone this area as MR6. Given that the recommended restrictions on zoning will allow up to 250 units per hectare, and the concept designs as submitted are 6 or 8 units shy of this, depending on the model. Final design could add a 3rd apartment building in this central area and still be within the target of 250 units per hectare if the other structures have minor modifications. If this is not a scenario the city approves, this zoning should be reduced. And so the large area on the left at the bottom is the medium density zoning. and yet that middle area, which I've redrawn as the low density or the lower height allowance, would fit actually everyone's proposed plans and would sort of close the door on something unexpected happening there. So let me put these three concerns into context.
And I'll just let you know you have about 30 seconds left before you reach your time limit.
Okay,
so
I'm on my last paragraph.
Yeah, thank you.
The official plan was created with public input to provide a comprehensive plan for the city of Waterloo. It takes into consideration many aspects of current and anticipated life within the city, including identifying areas of intensification. All of Union Street is so designated. With 5 apartment buildings already in our neighborhood and more approved, our neighborhood is contributing and will continue to contribute to intensification. That the ODC lands are coming available is an opportunity, but council and staff should be very hesitant to stray from the official plan. So I teach at Laurier. My own expertise is aesthetics and ethics. In my opinion, this decision is not merely a practical one, but a moral one. Through the official plan, the citizens of Waterloo have spoken, providing our vision of the city. To deviate from the plan is to break the covenant with the people. This is particularly so when there are alternatives. Our neighborhood will see intensification. It will contribute to the plan mapped out by our city. To phrase this as either we must increase density on the ODC lands or we fail to intensify and possibly add to urban sprawl is a false dichotomy. The application before you is a bright, shiny object, but it shouldn't distract from our previously worked out long-range planning. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the delegate? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Carl.
Thanks.
Next up, Derek Suderman. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you. Good evening. And I too would like to thank Wendy for this report. I am by no means a city planner, but I do think I have some expertise to show or to share here because I live on Rogers Street and I have children. And one of the big questions here, I think, is what to do with parks. So what I'd like to do is basically, I'll draw your attention to the second one there especially. There's been mention of parkland dedication, but that is not, I did not find that in this report. What I found in the report was a commitment to 1 hectare of parkland per 1,000 residents. And so I'd like to talk about that this evening. I'd like to say that I will describe why the proposed park space on the northwest corner of the subject property is profoundly inadequate, and that based on the City of Waterloo's own description of the purpose of parks, its policy, and the official city plan, much greater priority should be given to parkland than the current plan reflects. So that's kind of the, and incidentally, I didn't hear about this meeting till about 5 days ago, so I've given the whole text of my, this to the, I've given it in, but I didn't have time to send it. In any case, what I'd like to do is talk about the context, but if you notice tonight, virtually everything has been talking about the context in this property. I want to talk about the context of the neighborhood. This is a key thing. Here's the property, but on the north end here, it's been mentioned that Union Street is a main street. What hasn't been mentioned is that this is an official corridor, and in the official city policy, this is where development belongs. It's slated for development all up and down this street, and incidentally, this subject property is not within a node or a corridor, and so it is actually opposed by the growth management team of the City of Waterloo. It's buried on page 53, but I think that's really important. Growth management actually does not agree with this proposal. Secondly, it's bounded on the south by Mount Hope Cemetery, and I know I was here for an earlier meeting, and the developer of the property suggested that more green space was not necessary, basically because, and I'm paraphrasing, the cemetery could function as green space. This is not the case. I have children. We live near this cemetery. It is not a park, and I'll give you some reasons why. First, this is not a play area. Our children have been confronted and scolded on many occasions, been told that it's not to be played in, they're being too loud, it's disrespectful to throw a ball. This is culturally and religiously sensitive area. There are families that are visiting grave sites. This is not multi-use, and neither is the Northwest or Northeastern Park. If anybody has children and a ball runs out onto Moore Street, that is not functional. And it's in Kitchener. In any case, it's a great place for a walk. This is a great place. This is a great place for seniors. They love the cemetery. This is not a place for children to play. So the next thing, if you look at the already existing intensification, these are current apartment blocks that already exist in our neighborhood south of Union. If you notice, our nearest park is Mary Allen, and this is mentioned in the report. I would not want to be in one of those apartment buildings with a 2-year-old going across Union Street to your park. This has been mentioned several times. Notice, and I encourage you all to look at the city's plan and to look at the green spaces. I forget what the schedule is, but if you look at the green space, this is one of the only places south of Union in the entire city of Waterloo that has no green on it. None. But the thing that the report does not give is it doesn't actually give how many units. These are the units, and this does not include 3-story buildings. There are multi-residence, duplexes, etc. in our neighborhood. There's 555 total apartment units that are mentioned in the report, and this is not all the apartment buildings. This is not including all of the development that's coming on Union Street. If you do the conversion rate based on the city's conversion rate, this is over 1,000 residents. That's not counting any of the houses in the area. At 1 hectare of local park per 1,000 residents, this neighborhood is already overdue for a 1 hectare park. In other words, half of this property should be a park, based on the city's own policy. Before, and that again, that does not include like my house is a one family house. It doesn't include me in that 1,000. And this is before there is any development on this property, and this is before there is any more intensification on Union, and it's all coming. There's going to be 6-story apartment buildings all along Union. This neighborhood has already seen, and incidentally, if we don't believe that, all 3 of the ones that are on Union there were 6 or 7 stories, and the one that is 3 stories has been approved to become 6 stories. So that whole section in Union is going to intensify. So this neighborhood has already seen significant intensification. More has been approved and much more is coming, whatever happens on this property. There's no question. What's interesting to me is that at the same time, there are 2 parks that are being developed in Waterloo. They're just not in our neighborhood. This is Mary Allen Park. I wish this was our park. Gorgeous. One of the things that's interesting is that the city itself has said that this should be a template for future park projects as population density increases. This is what is happening in my neighborhood. Exactly that last line. Here are the objectives to guide choices. And if you look at this, notice how this is a multiple use of space. This is multi-use space. This isn't a park that's beside a major artery in the city. Right? This is big enough to have a skating rink. We were asking before, can a skating rink fit in the corner? It doesn't matter because the puck is going to go in the road. It doesn't matter if it can fit it. Anyway, you can tell I'm a bit passionate about this. I encourage you to look at all of this stuff is drawn from the Mary Allen Park PowerPoint presentation, which is available online. It has a wonderful description of the purpose of parks. Neither of the parks that are proposed would fulfill those uses because they're too small. Currently, and incidentally, Mary Allen Park is the closest one, as I said. It's currently serving a local population that's over 1,000, which means that it's already full. It's on the other side of Union, as I said, and it's in a lower density neighborhood than ours. And yet that's the one that's gotten expanded. I wish, and again, I'm not against the expansion of Mary Allen. I'm saying that let's live up to our commitment. If that is going to be the model, then let's make it a model. Alexandra Park, and I'm not going to spend any time on this, other than to say it's too small. The city council has recognized it's too small, and you're buying properties around it to expand it. You already did. This is exactly what's going to happen in our area. You're going to build a park that's already too small before it's even built. If you superimpose a baseball diamond on the park, it's not big enough to hold a baseball diamond. So, here's the proposal. We've already heard about this. What I'd like to do is show you some numbers. Again, 1,000 per 1 hectare, approximately, and incidentally, if you go back to this, based on the current population, based on city policy, it would seem like 1/2 of this should already be a park before anything happens here, based on that policy. But 500 residents per acre, or per times 1,000 residents per 1 hectare of parkland, the proposal should have 1 hectare, 1/2 a hectare of park. In other words, 1/4 of it should be a park, according to Waterloo policy. The proposed park is just over 0.1 hectare, in other words, 1/5 of the size. And this isn't taking into account the neighborhood. Or starting with a 0.1 per hectare park, there should be 100 residents in the zoning. Again, according to Waterloo policy. Or, to use the conversion rate, 54 units. So you can see why this is in my neighborhood and I'm frustrated by the meeting that I've heard so far. We're not paying attention. We say that we're committed to parks, and then we're paving it over and we're getting money in it instead. I just heard there's an in lieu contribution, but what is that? Imagine this space here with all of the stacked townhouses around the sides and a park in the middle, where you'd have an ODC thing that would actually welcome the community into a park and not into a whole bunch of interior buildings. And I already mentioned that. So, to conclude, I am not against intensification. This is not a rail against intensification. As I said, intensification is already happening. I support intensification in my neighborhood. This has begun and it will continue, and it will increase. It will be faster in the future. The basic question is not whether housing density will intensify, but whether it belongs on this property, and I don't think it does. Again, if you look at these two, which one do you think comes from a higher density neighborhood? The park on the upper left or the park on the right? I live in the neighborhood on the left. As Waterloo has recognized, development does not just mean buildings. Access to local parks represents a very significant aspect of a thriving, vibrant city. Our city has created an official plan that strategically locates intensification and has enshrined the importance of parkland in policy by providing a concrete target. I am also inspired by the city's decision to point to Mary Allen as a template, and especially a template for population density in the city. This is exactly what's happening in my neighborhood. The subject property certainly has incredible potential to follow that lead, and I've got a whole description of what that park might look like in here. But especially a multi-use recreational area, the kind of flexible space that will attract people of all ages to enjoy the outdoors. In the current proposal, the city will create an anemic park squished between housing, too small to fulfill its purpose, overwhelmed by demand before it even gets built. Finally, back to this. In 20, 30, 50 years from now, when Union Street is lined with apartment buildings, what would we rather have on this particular property that's a block off the main road? Another crowded housing development with a token playground and a tree, maybe a swing set, or a vibrant park that serves as a community hub and recreation site for thousands of people within a few blocks who have no yard of their own? I trust that City Council will support its vision of a vibrant community by following its local parks policy, an official city plan with respect to this property. This site does provide a truly unique opportunity to enhance a thriving, established neighborhood as it continues to grow, as it says on page 29. Following the Mary Allen template, I believe the majority of the subject property should become the ODC Park. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. Just as a point of correction, there is no parkland in lieu, I believe, in this case. In the earlier presentation, so for example, from the tall building that's going on Regina Street, there would be parkland in lieu on that one, as an example. But the intention here is to get what is required on this development site, which is the size that you see in the application. There's really there's really only two options to go with one way or the other. Okay. So that's what we're attempting to do here. And in the case of our official plan, the reason for having the need for parks in totally redeveloped areas is because of years gone by, 75 years ago, there was no case for parks in developments like this, which is unfortunately why you don't particularly have one there. So, unfortunately.
Which is my point. This is the opportunity to have it.
Yeah. In our case, the land has to be for sale and available to us at a rate we can buy, and I'm guessing that's probably not the case because it's industrial property. But questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
And last up, registered delegation, Keith Reed.
Kevin Reed, Waterloo. Just a couple of points. I won't be long. I know this is we're getting to the end here. First of all, councillors, I thought there was a vote going on tonight, and to hear from the planners that there's still some more small adjustments to be made. I would find that very concerning before you vote. That there's still some things that they want to change. I thought whatever was you were voting on might be solidified at this particular point, which leads me to my very final point, which I'll get to in a second. Part of the process with this, I know it seems like there was a marvelous community spirit, and we got together for all of these meetings, and it was great. But I have to tell you, after the first one, there was nothing after that. There was no compromise. We asked the people to be creative. We challenged them to be creative with their design, just like some of the other proposals said. We talked to them about that, and we kind of got blank looks. At the very next meeting, it was the exact same proposal. There was nothing changed at all from it. So it may have seemed like it was very collegial, and we had a lot of input. We actually didn't have a lot of input. Initially, there was some small adjustments made. I think what you've seen and what you've heard from people is that we want more adjustments and more creativity. We started talking about parkland like it was already passed. Like the motion was already passed, and it hasn't been. And I would challenge you not to pass this. There still needs to be a lot of work done. You've heard a lot of information from everybody here that we need to. There's more work that needs to be done on this. We started talking about parkland and arguing about it. It really does come down to density. If we have a lower density, we can have more parkland. Right? Although we've heard some other constructive things where we can have more density and more parkland. So I think there still needs to be more work done on this file. I don't think it's over. Again, the neighborhood has spoken on that. I'll go back to the official plan 2012. 5 of the 7 sitting councillors voted for that official plan. And so I think, now I'm just envisioning this, but I think you looked at that site and went, oh, that's industrial, that's ODC. I think eventually that's got to conform. And we've talked about conformity, I don't want to repeat that, but I think you said that should conform to the existing neighborhood, which is low density. And so just in trying to change things, I know things change, but you guys had a vision back there for things, the nodes and corridors. You guys voted for the higher density, and again, that has been already expressed. So I'm not going to do that. Just like to close with, obviously you have 3 choices: to approve of this amendment, to not approve of it, or to send it back. I think that's a third choice that you should really consider and send it back. I'm fine to sit down with this marvelous group over here and negotiate some more with people. And Wendy, thank you for sorry. And it would be great to sit down if we know that there's going to be, and you can tell people that there should be more change and there should be more creativity. And that's what I would ask that you guys vote on tonight, is that let's just delay this and let's talk some more, because there's been a lot of great stuff that's come out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I think there's certainly some things that we need to. We have to make a decision at some point in time. The Ontario Planning Act gives us this period of time to make that decision, and so we're into that period of time right now. So, further questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you. Where's my next file? Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Adam? Oh, please come on up and state your name. There's one more delegate, Ron. Please come up, state your name and municipality, please.
Sure. My name is Blake Larson from Waterloo. Thank you, Mayor and members of Council. I live at 96 Rogers Street. It's directly across from the proposed development, right at the northwest corner. I was part of the small working group meetings as well, so I have some pretty good knowledge of this. I'd like to also thank Wendy. I know she's put a lot of effort into this, and my neighbors and I really appreciated being able to interact with her directly and communicate our thoughts. That having been said, I feel that there's a lot of concerns that have been brought up in this process that they're not really addressing this proposal, especially with concern to like noise in the buildings themselves. It's kind of backwards to me that we're looking at building facades and proposals like that when it really has nothing to do with zoning. And I know I've had a lot of back and forth with Wendy on this. Like, what are we really going to get when all's said and done is a big question that's still kind of looming in all our heads. That kind of leads into my next point where, in my mind, the biggest issue with this application is the concept drawing. Pretty much just putting that on paper, it's probably going to attract a certain developer to the land instead of allowing a developer to really come in with an innovative idea, as some of my neighbors have said. The language that Wendy used at one of the smaller meetings made me believe that if a developer adapted this concept drawing, it'd pretty much be like an ideal situation for the city. And site planning, building permits would probably go pretty smooth. But I just feel it's pretty uninspired. It doesn't really blend in at all with the existing neighborhood, as Kevin has talked. My opinion, which may be wrong, is that Mr. Levine and his developers are really looking to maximize profit here. They're not really I'm not seeing anything from them that's really benefiting the community at large. Can we make something that really blends into the Mount Hope Cemetery? We've got this 200-year-old cemetery, and we're going to stick 6-story condo buildings right next to it. It seems kind of strange. If the city's intent is to add density to established neighborhoods, could we do as Mr. Moose described, and could we make it not just about density, but density done well? Proposal as it stands just doesn't really speak to that vision, in my opinion. It's been mentioned that a few times. That the ODC lands are marked as an industrial transitional area. And I just wanted to speak to that for a second because it is marked industrial transitional, but it's still in the middle of a bunch of single-family dwellings. I actually looked at the map of all the industrial transitional buildings in the city, and what I noticed is that pretty much all of them were on nodes and corridors. This is pretty much the only one that is not, doesn't conform to that. So it seems like everybody is assuming during this process that, industrial transitional should equate to higher density, which, it really doesn't in my opinion. And then, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but one thing that really stuck out to me in the report was some wording on some of the trees where the report stated the following: throughout the properties behind Rogers Street, there were 5 fir trees, evergreens, and spruce trees that are also in good condition. However, the way the layout of the buildings are, it appears they will not be able to save them. So essentially what the proposal is saying is that the trees and the future residents of this, of this property have to suffer when it could be solved by creative design, really, when all's said and done. I hope that you guys have all the information you need to make the right decision tonight. We have had a lot of back and forth on this, and I don't think the proposal really encompasses all the concerns that the residents have brought forward. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I feel like we'd like to see a lot more innovative design that really just blends in better with the community. And that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you. And I'll concur with you. It is a very unique property, having it in the area that it is today as an industrial property. Very, very unique. So something that more challenging to work around, as you can even see with the 2 proposals that we've seen today.
Definitely.
Questions for the delegate? Seeing none, I'll do last call to the public, and I know Ron wants to come up. Anybody else further from the public? Seeing none, come on up, Ron. Close.
Good evening, Mayor Jaworski. I just want to thank Mayor Jaworski and the members of council for considering this application. We've come a long way over the past 14 months. I've spent a lot of time talking and consulting with their neighbors one-on-one and through the informal meeting, through various meetings with the working group and with neighbors. We've made a tremendous number of changes from our original proposal, as Glenn has pointed out. So I thank you for considering this application tonight. One of the biggest unresolved issues that we've talked about is the park, whether we want to go with the mid-block park or whether the park on the corner. I just want to point out the mid-block park is a very small park. It's 0.1 hectare. I think that it's really too small to be effective as a park to provide the type of amenities the neighbors would like to see. The park on the northwest, on the corner of Roger and Moore Street, it's 20% larger in area. It would be able to provide either similar or same type of amenities, which would be able to provide it in the mid-block. So again, and I think it's the overall, with all the changes that we've made with the input from the neighborhoods and bringing in Patrick Simmons and the Martin Simmons group, I think we've come up with a very aesthetically pleasing design for a development which would enhance the neighborhood and enhance the overall city of Waterloo. So I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I can answer those. And at the same time, the architect, we have representatives from Martin Simmons here. If you have any questions regarding the architectural features of the development, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Ron. Questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Questions, Councillor Durrell.
I will move the motion with a comment. Read this now?
Go ahead, yes.
Okay, so the motion would be the staff recommendation that I'm moving. Having considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders and considered the professional opinions of the planning staff, bless you, Council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 1706 93-119 Roger Street in accordance with Section 8 of IPPW 2018-05 for the reasons specified in Section 7 of the report. If I have a seconder, I'd like to make a comment.
Seconded by Councillor Whaley.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So obviously we've had a lot of communication with the neighborhood, and I think there's been a lot of when I look at where this started and where it is today, I think we've come a long way. I think there's a lot of things that in Wendy's report went through all of the things that the community had concerns about at the very beginning, and it was interesting. I was sitting here nodding away, yep. And I think the staff proposal that's come forward talks to a lot of those issues. And so, I'm happy to see the 3 bedrooms. With respect, Ron, I think the park is a really important part of this. And I think that the park, if it is on the corner of Roger and Moore, it will always be the condos or whatever, the townhouses. It will be that development's park. Whereas if we can shift it over into the mid-block, the next door neighbor is not part of that development and it becomes a community park. I appreciate the delegations coming forward. Specifically, Derek, the gray hairs on the side of my head are from literally trying to get more parks in Uptown. And I think your area definitely needed it. But, as Mr. Rapp and I were speaking earlier, we had to not only buy the houses, we had to buy the land, the houses, and then we had to demo them for Alexandra, which was a 6-year process and major legal negotiations. We're in a position right now where we don't own the land, but the owner would have to pay us parkland dedication fees. So in that case, we are really hoping to expand, to at least get a community park, which will be the beginning, and I think will have a huge community benefit. I think that I think at the end of the day, these are always really difficult because your neighborhood has a lot of pride, and I want to be really respectful of that. I think that that the townhouses that will be facing your neighborhood are respecting that. I think that they're coming in line with what we'd want to see with that space. And so what I'm hoping is council will support this decision with our staff recommended park. And if we can eke out as much green space on that mid block, that would be the best.
Comments? I see Councillor Burke, Councillor Veith, Councillor Henry.
As Councillor Durrell rightly points out, this is really difficult because, we've had discussions around this table, even in the last couple of weeks, of developments that were, in some ways, inspirational and will be transformational for this city. Think about the one at the Adult Rec Center a couple of weeks ago, and others that will come up. And then we see what's coming here, and I wonder, what are we building? Are we building that in that same part of the city? It's interesting because from my ward and Ward 2, we have parks that no one uses because they're really small, and it just, the system was never put in place. Councillor Turrell's right. It's really tough to put a park into an urban environment that is not only in the right location, but is of the right size that people can put an ice rink on it, or, heaven forbid, a ball diamond, or because that causes trouble sometimes. But so I know it's tough for us to ask you to be patient. You'll get a better park. But that really is kind of the way that works. And as I came in here today, and after reading this over the weekend, I thought, wow, that's cool. We've got a compromise, which would be your Section C. And sometimes a compromise isn't always the right thing, which is, I'm sure, what you're feeling. That not everything is maybe the way that it should be. And maybe that green space should be bigger. And maybe, as Marcus said, there should be more innovative design, that interfacing courtyard. But I come back to that question, what are we building? Like a couple of weeks ago, we made decisions that built really cool buildings and did something really special somewhere. Are we doing that here? Just want to ask that question.
Councillor Veith is up next.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Jaworski. This is a great, in my opinion, mixed residential project. I like it that there's 3-bedroom units, so families can live in there, people that are singles or are downsizing. It's a great spot for them, and to stay within your own, for folks that want to do this, stay in the neighborhood, because that happens out in the suburbs where I live. And again, out in Ward 3, we have areas like this that have, there's townhouses beside single-family houses, there's apartments, and they're all, there's small parkettes in between, but they make up the neighborhood. And so I see this as quite similar to being out in Lakeshore. I prefer more green space in between, and I really liked Marcus's presentation about creating the green in between the buildings. I think that's a great idea, and I think there's plenty of parking. I think this is a great space for people that don't own a car. You can live in this area without having to own a car, so we probably could use less parking spaces. And I don't want to get into not supporting a development because we have a disagreement on the size of parks or where they should be. So I'm sure that in the end this will work out. Everybody will have park space. We'll have lots of units for folks to live in, and so I will support the staff recommendation as printed. Thank you.
Next up, Councillor Henry, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I want to extend my thanks as well to staff on this. Wendy, you've been handed a lot of interesting files that are coming forward here, and in June. None of them are easy to work through and have involved a lot of work. I want to thank the applicant and team. There's been certainly a lot of change from the beginning to where we are here, and not a lot of difference at the end. And I think that's mostly you coming our way rather than the other way around. And I hope folks appreciate in the audience, even though they haven't come all the way to where you would like to be, that substantial movement on projects like these, which is something we try to do here in the city. I hear the strong arguments around park space. I think one of the challenges with reading an official plan document that's 400 pages is to be able to get a sense of how it operates and what its key elements are. The more specific trumps the more general, and the aspirational is trumped by the specific legal tools that we're able to activate and enable. In this case, the legal tool we can activate and enable on park space is the land dedication, and opt to take it rather than cash. So that we can have a park space. And the calculations were very clear. I think Wendy's slides sort of showed exactly how the math worked out and how we made sure that there was a community benefit size of a net of additional open space that was part of the requirement, which will be maintained in perpetuity by the applicant, most of that as a community benefit. I know it's not enough. I mean, it's not enough for the aspiration of where we'd like to be as a city. The next step we are taking on that, Commissioner Dijkstra's department is leading a park strategy. We have an open house on a date I can't remember fairly soon to start getting people's ideas and thoughts around that. How do we get there, right? It's one thing to have an aspiration, but without a plan that's listed by actions and has budget followed up by it, it's just an aspiration. And so these are the next key steps that we're taking to be able to translate those aspirational elements of the official plan into reality. And that's really important. I've heard from you very clearly that this particular subsection of Uptown, of Councillor Durrell's ward, does not have a park. There's one 650 meters away. I look at the land area of Councillor Durrell's ward, the east side of my ward, which is about half of the Uptown ward, has one municipally owned park. It is Veterans Green, and it has an old sort of statue and is a commemorative of veterans, and it is not very big. That's it for the entire east half of my ward. There are gaps in large parts of the city for this that we have to plug, and we have to have strategies and tools to be able to get there. It's a gap that we need to deal with. And I think the neighborhood context makes a lot of sense for where that is. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but really the first open spaces that were available to the general public in communities in North America were cemeteries on the edges of cities. And those were the first pieces of open space that folks got inside a very industrial revolution, gritty, dirty kinds of spaces. Then city founders said, what we need is more and big open spaces. Waterloo Park was really a visionary element of our founders of the city, on the edge of the city at that time. And that was what satisfied us for decades of what parks were supposed to be and why the core is so deficient on park space, because that was how these things were built when these were done in the 30s and 40s and 50s. That was the park space that we were thinking of. The view has changed, and we need to find ways to catch up. We'll get there. We just can't get there all in one shot, and because it has to be on our land. We can't have too grand a vision of other people's land without the tools and the dollars and the plans to get there. And that's what I know we're working on. So I appreciate the input. There's been a lot of movement, and I do hope that this form of mixed development will be of great broader benefit to future residents of the community, and will add more vibrancy and diversity with some space, finally, that we can start from in this important older neighborhood in the heart of our city.
Councillor Maven.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Just want to emphasize what Councillor Henry just said. When you made your presentations, and you made great presentations, and you really reminded us of what some of the things we should be doing, some of the things we should be thinking, and nothing wrong with that. I think that should happen to every council meeting. But every ward, and I don't know the calculation in Ward 1, but Ward 1's the same. If I talk to anybody, We need more park space. I'm sorry, we're building more, we need more park space. So I hear that same comment and the same need, if you will, from residents throughout the city. And I think that it's a bigger issue, and I certainly can't say that you're wrong in what you've told us, but I'm not sure that this is the one example that we can create something that'll solve all those problems in one fell swoop. One thing on a positive note, if I may, and that is the monument, if you will, or the arch, the facade, the historical part. When I was 12 and 13 years old, that's a few years ago, I delivered telegrams in the city of Waterloo.
Telegrams?
Telegrams. It was predating instant messaging.
By a while.
But there's only 6 buildings left that I used to deliver telegrams to. This was called Ontario Tool and Die back then when I was doing it. But it was this was one of the buildings, and I'm glad to see at least part of the building is still being retained. So thank you very much for that. Okay,
and with that, I think I'll turn to me. I think what's really struck me in all this process is how the community has so much embraced the existing use of the site of Ontario Die. I think it really speaks to the respectful, multi-generational usage of this building. But I don't hear anybody saying, gee, I wish somebody else would move in there and convert it to new industry with trucks and stuff like that. So a rezoning was always in the cards for this space. And we can't lose fact that it's not only are we getting rid of a industrial space, which potential future use, we have no idea what it would be in this neighborhood, but we're getting the remediation of the land, remediation at such a level that people will actually be able to live on at much a higher level. And so we can't lose sight of that. But anyway, I think we had certainly a very complicated situation here tonight on both files, and it's good to have conclusion on this. And seeing any further comments, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, that carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Big Wendy night.
Yeah, thank you for all your work on this. Thanks to the neighbors. Sometimes things move fast at the end, but it's because we've all put a lot of work into this over the past year, really. And with that, since it's a special council meeting, motion to adjourn. Councillor Durrell, Councillor Whaley, all those in favor?